Hi, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us at our December board work session and special action agenda. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I am going to turn it over to Mrs. Sugars for roll call.
Mrs. Arroyo, Ms. Friedel,
Here.
Mr. Goodwin, Mrs. Matlack,
Here.
Mrs. Neary,
Here.
Mr. Avadia,
Here.
Mrs. Schultz,
Here.
Mrs. Tom,
Here.
Mrs. Seidel.
Here. Okay, what was that?
Just move Eric onto the other side.
Okay, great. Okay. We do not have any board recognition tonight, but we do have a presentation. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Malash to introduce our guest speaker this evening and kick off our presentation and subsequent discussion.
Great, thank you, Mrs. Seidel. I appreciate that. I'm very excited. Bob Garrison is here with us tonight. He is one of the principals that represents Garrison Architects. The board will remember, and some of the community members will recall back earlier in the spring, we went through a process and we identified Garrison Architect as the new architects of record for the Cherry Hill School District. Bob and his team have been in all of our schools and all of our facilities, taking a look at what's going on, what needs to be done, and what the current status is. So Bob has come and presented to the Strategic Planning Committee, and I'm very excited that Bob is able to be with us this evening, and he is going to do a presentation. Let me just get it queued up, and then I will turn it over to Bob.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Malash, and it's good to see all the board members. I see a few of them in person right here and then some virtually in these challenging times. So thank you for joining us this evening. And as Dr. Malash said, Garrison Architects, we're so pleased to be able to work in the district. And since early this spring, we've been in every single building. I think we count 22 buildings in 18 different sites. And it was really a valuable opportunity for me to get immersed in the condition of the facilities. So with that in mind, our due diligence takes us to various projects that we're contemplating and presenting to the board for a future bond referendum. And that's really what this is about. It's laying the groundwork, getting our due diligence started so that we can put together a program that's embraced by the board and the community at large. One of the first things that we need to understand in complementing any kind of program is what is the state funding, how does that work, and that guides a lot of our decision-making abilities. So we'll go to the agenda real quick. For those of you who are not familiar with Garrison Architects, I thought I'd do a little quick overview of our credentials and our vast experience in the K-12 market. Most importantly, there is school construction funding. How is that funding? How does it work? What's the difference between renovations and new constructions? It's most important to understand some of that as we go forward. You go forward and the community goes forward in the decision-making process. I've walked all the buildings. I've been to all the sites, but a lot of our members in the communities don't understand the age of our buildings, don't realize the aged infrastructure that the board and the community is living with and our students and our staff. So we'll quickly give you an overview of some of that, which will help you understand the need for a future capital program. We'll then move to a typical educational example. In this instance, we're going to go to Kingston Elementary School. We're going to look at what are some of the renovations, what are some of the capital projects, the essential building systems that need to be corrected versus a new construction model. Because we heard that in the last referendum, we heard that in the community. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about how that works at Carusi Middle School, another great debate within their community. And then finally, Cherry Hill East High School. So we're going to take a barometer, a measure at our elementary, our middle, and high schools, and show you the comparisons of renovations and new construction. We'll then move to a question and answer session. So Garrison Architects, founded in 1969, we pride ourselves on the fact that we're a second generation family-owned business. Unfortunately, Dad, the founder, can't be with us tonight. He's in a lot warmer place. He's the smartest guy that I know. But in all seriousness, myself, Brooks, and Christy go to work every single day. And I think one of the things that we bring to our districts is a lot of family energy, family synergy. My role as Director of Operations President is really in educational facility planning. This is what I do, doing the programming on the front end, getting the state money. Brooks, my brother, is design and construction administration. And then the backbone of our organization is my sister, Chief Financial Officer. I'm selling her short with that title. She also is our lawyer, our confidant. She's the glue that keeps us together. She understands state contract law probably better than anybody. She has abilities with the Office of the State Comptroller and all kind of different things. So the three of us have different roles, and that complements us and allows us to bring the resources necessary to our districts. We do have 14 other professionals, 7 licensed architects, professional planners. We pride ourselves on the latest technology with modeling. If you go on our website right now, we have modeled some new facilities. There's some new grants out there for vocational schools, as you may know, and we've created some artistic renderings, if you will, to help the taxpayers understand some of our newer projects. Educational experience, as I mentioned, we're one of the most experienced educational firms, concentrations in the state. We're currently the architect of record in 72 New Jersey K-12 districts, mostly in South Jersey. As you know, there's only 569 in the whole state, but we have a significant market share here in the South. I think one of the most important things, credential-wise, that I'm proud of is that one of our first districts, Lower Cape May Regional, 1994, I'm working on, successfully passed 4, but working on our 5th referendum in that particular community. And that really gives me a lot of sense of accomplishment, knowing that we've serviced that community through 4 successful programs. We're looking for a 5th over a 26-year period. And finally, my experience in relationships with New Jersey Department of Education. It is absolutely not a necessary evil. I have them as a partner in our program because, quite honestly, without them, our projects can't get approved, our projects don't have state share, and we can't advance them to the next level. So I embrace that relationship. Do have a working relationship largely because of the amount of work that we do in K-12, and that's something that we will forge ahead and use to our best ability when planning your particular project. As we move to the Educational Facility Construction Financing Act, quickly, it was established in 2000, 8.6 billion, 3.9 billion. These are the monies that were distributed to that particular program over time. The most important things for you, the taxpayers, the board, and the administration to understand is that 40% in the red, 40% of eligible costs are a district aid percentage, which means 40% in Cherry Hill. What they're saying there is that if you have an eligible project, a roof, a window, a door, an HVAC, the state provides 40% of aid. That aid is in the form of debt service aid. In other words, you have to borrow money in order to get the debt service or service aid going forward. New construction, most important in the topic that we're going to cover tonight. Whether the new construction is a standalone building, like in the comparison and analysis that we're going to talk about, or as an addition. Let's say it's a multi-purpose room addition, library addition, and cafeteria addition. The state has set the dollar amount for that construction cost at $143 per square foot. We don't have to be in New Jersey prevailing rate construction world to understand that that presents extreme challenges because we don't build things for $143 a square foot. The state, however, is not interested in increasing that amount because that would require more funding on their part going forward. So when the original act was passed in 1998, it was $138. And then in 2000, they raised it $5 and haven't revisited that particular topic. So the new construction is $143 a square foot at 40%. So it's really a small comparison, 70 some dollars a square foot to something that could cost $300 or $350. And that's the important thing when looking at facilities. When we talk about renovating a facility or demolishing and building new or acquiring land and building new, you only get that $143. And you'll see in our examples going forward how that really handicaps the amount that the taxpayers have to pay for the project. The long-range facility planning exercise, as Dr. Melange pointed out, this assessment has been a proactive approach. We hit the ground running. I guess it was in April and in May, and then through the summer months. The high schools took a lot of time. The two high schools are over 300,000 square feet and take days to walk. But I pride myself with Greg McCarty to say that we try to get into every single room in the district. So when someone asks me a question, I can say, oh, I remember that purple room or that configuration to try to get a guide. What this slide most vividly indicates is the age of your facilities. 13 elementary schools. We start at the top with Barclay, 1959, and then some work done in 2008. Barton, 66, 1970, 1968, 66, 69. Kingston, the point of tonight's presentation, 1955 with the 62 classroom addition on the back. 64, 62, you can see it going down. On to the middle schools, the three middle schools, Beck, Carusi, and Rosa, 67, 61, 61. High schools, 67, 56. And then here at our facility at Mulberg, 69. And then the Mallcrest facilities, the different ages of 1920, which is the old school, 1960. And then the newest building that you have is your warehouse facility. The last major referendum, and you see the date of 2000 in a lot of these instances, were the classroom additions or renovations at the various schools. Well, now we sit here in 2020, and we realize that the last investment, the last date on a lot of these buildings is now 2 decades old, 20 years. And I think that's in large part as to why we're sitting here this evening and why we'll have this planning go in the future, is that these buildings have served us well, but we need to invest dollars in to keep them going. So what I've presented here is an overview, and this is a snapshot of the long-range facility plan document that's been developed. These are the cost estimate or the summary pages. There's countless backup that goes into each of these categories. Actually, the document's over 150 pages, and we keep refining it as our partners, Environmental Resolutions on the site side, TT Environmental on the asbestos side, are giving us numbers. So what we have here and the way the presentation is formatted is that we have areas of potential deficiency. These areas are in site work. This is ADA compliance issues. This is paving and drainage, the exterior renovations. The largest category there that you'll see is roofing replacement, a large roofing program. I think it's over $30 million in district. Interior renovations. This covers other ADA initiatives as well as bathroom renovations, security vestibules, et cetera, or working some special spaces, library instruction, specialized spaces, renovations of those kinds. The next big investment that we look forward in each of the buildings is HVAC. Obviously, with the presentation of this terrible disease and virus, we want to make sure that our building systems are state-of-the-art, that our building systems have proper ventilation, the latest technology, and so we'll be incorporating that as well as energy conservation measures like controls and some other things. Electrical construction, IT infrastructure, bringing power to our buildings, making sure that we have convenience power in our classrooms for proper technology and instruction. Plumbing construction is mostly electric water coolers, which we're phasing out. We're using a lot of bottle fillers and some of the latest technology, clean technology there. In some of the schools, in order to equalize the elementary schools in particular, there is plans, as there was last time, for all-purpose rooms or multi-purpose rooms in a few select buildings. That's why you see a new construction component of the renovation option. So as we put the total estimated costs up there, and the estimated costs are bricks and mortar as well as soft costs. Those costs could be architect, engineering, construction manager, cost of election day, all those different things. Those total costs are in the left-hand column. And there's also a built-in contingency because we know that these projects will be done over phases in time, unforeseen conditions. That's all part of the program. The estimated state share. The estimated state share down in green is renovations, eligible renovations at the architect's estimate. That's the numbers that you see in black at 40% state aid. So the renovations are fully funded if they're eligible at 40%. And so what you see there is me going down and handicapping the state aid. Now you might note that the first category, you say, well, how come site work didn't get an estimated state share? That particular item of site work happens to be a digital sign that, believe it or not, the state does not pay for. So we have different nuances. I've handicapped that as we go down. And in this particular instance, if the board presented a program of $12.6 million, having that new construction at $143 a square foot times 40%, the total state share would be 70%, 8.8 million versus 3.8 million would be the state share. So that's the renovation category. So it'd be $12.6 million worth of projects, and then it costs the taxpayers 8.8 million. Let's say Kingston was demolished. So we tear down the existing 43,970 square foot building. We add in site work, et cetera, that has to be done. We're creating the parking, getting rid of the tennis courts in front, and we demolish that at $20 a square foot. That cost is $879,460. Then we have to build a new building. So what we do is we look at our enrollment projections. Our demographer just did them for the district. In 2024 and 2025, 413 students. So the 413 students, you say, well, Garrison, how big of a building do you build? How do you know? I mean, how's this work? Well, back to the Education Facility Construction Financing Act, an elementary school is 125 gross square feet per student. So you take the students times 125, gives you a building of 51,625. So the allowable square footage from the state that they would full fund at $143 at 40% gives you $2.9 million. So the school, with the demo, the site work, and the new construction, is going to cost $25 million, and yet state government, because of the funding formula, would only contribute 2.9. Therefore, the difference, as you can see simply, between renovating Kingston, putting the multi-purpose room on, is $8.8 million to the taxpayer versus $22 million if we did a new school. I put a little sketch behind that. You say, how is this possible? You can see there we did a footprint of 51,000 square feet. The green area is the courtyard because we have to have natural light. It's just a concept plan, but it shows you that you can build these facilities, and you'll see them in the other two examples, off to one side of the site, occupy the building, complete it, swing the students over, and demolish it at the completion. Carusi, along the same lines, 129,000 square feet, again built in 1961, added to in 64 and 95 and 2000. The total cost of the renovations are $33.7 million. The big thing here at Carusi is the fact that we have asbestos-contained materials that have to be dealt with during the construction. This is in the plaster, the roofing, the walls, in some areas. So the reason that, and this was in the last bond, that I thought it was a very, very good approach, is that temporary classrooms have to be put on site because you can't abate the asbestos, do all the renovations, which are largely exist in the areas of the classrooms, and keep the building operational. So there's some TCUs there. Unfortunately, state government looks on temporary classrooms as just that. It's not permanent construction, not eligible for funding. So that's why you see 0 there. So if you were to make a renovation investment at Carusi for 33.7, the state would contribute 12.7, the taxpayer share is $21 million. What happens if we demolish Carusi, just like Kingston? 129 plus site work. We also have to take care of that asbestos abatement, because when we demolish that building, we just can't put all that plaster, VAT, blue dots, pipe insulation into a dumpster. That has to be abated prior to demolition and is part of the formula. Then the new building, just like before, we've got our enrollments. We have our 839 students times 134 gross square feet per student. So elementary school level, 125. Our middle school level, 134. Bigger kids, more square footage, et cetera. That yields a state share of 6.4 or $54 million to the taxpayer. So it's more than double to build new Carusi than it is to renovate at $21 million. The concept plan here shows where the baseball field is. That's where the existing footprint is with the 2 basketball courts or 2 soccer fields out front. That's largely where the school is. So what we would do is we would build on the back of the site. This would be a 2-story building. You see there with the courtyards on either side, the classrooms would be 2-story across the front, worked in a soccer field to the back along with parking. This school, actually, this footprint comes from Washington Township. Their middle school is known as Bunker Hill Middle School. It's a great plan, doesn't have dead ends, very efficient plan with the 2 circular classroom wings. We move on to High School East. As I mentioned, 2 large buildings in district, almost 370,000 square feet, many, many years of renovations. The investment here is $81 million. The thing to note here at East is some demolition and new construction of the K-Wing, which is adjacent to the current board project of rebuilding the breezeways and the classrooms facing the courtyard. That investment would yield 26 million to almost 27 million, 54 to the taxpayer.
Let me just know, I think it's F1.
Oh, I'm sorry, what is it?
Just so
Yeah,
people will be visualizing
Yes.
what it is.
yes, not K, right. Lower hand side, dance studio included in that particular model. We will correct that. On the new construction side, demolish 369,000 square feet. Again, at the $20, tear the building down, and then build a 3-story because we have a limited footprint area, 3-story building with site work. Again, the projected enrollment from our current demographics in 24-25 will be 2,066 students. State government realized that our largest students are funded at 151 gross square feet per student, which yields us a building of about 311,000 square feet, just slightly smaller than the 369 that you have today. The gulping numbers here are 155 million for new construction of a high school. The state would be 17.8 in state share, again, the same formula, which leaves 137 million to the taxpayer. And on the concept plan, you can see how the 3-story school would fit between baseball and softball in the back part of the site. We would keep intact the athletic facility, main athletic facility, the tennis courts, and then use the parking lot and the old building footprint to replenish some of the athletic fields that'll be covered by the new footprint. I do ask you to take a look at the efficiency of the new footprint rather than the sprawling existing footprint that you have going on different angles at different areas, different dates of construction. This is very typical of what we see in a community that does a program over 40 or 50 years, that these schools are added onto in increments as boards can afford them or as population dictates, and you end up having a sprawling plan that sometimes has 2 stories, or in the case of these, has breezeways that have to go across courtyards. So it becomes very, very large campus, if you will. So our travel distance and our efficiency, if you have a blank piece of paper, of course, is much greater because you can stack the classrooms, et cetera, et cetera. So the takeaway from tonight's presentation is it's kind of just a snapshot of a thought process as we go forward in the bond referendum planning, is that renovations are funded dramatically different than new construction. There's obviously pros and cons of having new construction versus renovation, the disruption, the perception in the community, a lot of different factors that go into that. But one thing that we're committed, as kind of, I've always said this to Dr. Malash and Ms. Sugars, is that we're the new kid on the block. So we're asking a lot of questions. We're challenging a lot of things that we see based on our experience. We're going to be good listeners going forward and receptive to the community, because that's the only way that an eventual referendum gets passed. Is if we take the information, we process the information, we give our professional opinion, and then it comes out the other end with consensus. And that's really our goal in going forward and our service to the district. And it's a huge challenge, and I look forward to it. I've just to get into every single school, meet every single principal, and I should pause and say the principals have been most accommodating, very excited, obviously, about why they saw me walking through their building. No promises made, but that somebody was actually, getting their feet wet, if you will, and that's our goal. So with that.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. I know the board has been having some level of this conversation for a very long time, and I think this nicely positions us to start having that second level of conversation. It also is something that, as you mentioned, the community had asked for. You know, they really wanted to see us deep dive into the new versus renovation costs. I mean, for me, there was no surprise in the difference in that cost, but I do think that there, over the years, has been some misinformation out there about the cost of new versus renovation. So I want to thank you for really spelling that out and making it crystal clear in this presentation for all of us, so that there's no no doubt as to what each scenario will be reimbursed at. So I'm going to open it up to questions from our other board members. I'm going to start with Ben, Mr. Obadia, as he leads our charge in this as chair of strategic planning, and then I'll just go with hands from there.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Seidel. So, Mr. Garrison, great job. I think, this is an important place to start. As you're noting, there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of community to engage, but we've got to start with a shared understanding. And I think the way you've broken it down here is great. You've been architect of record for less than a year for sure. You've hit the ground running amazingly well. I appreciate all the work that you've put in based on strategic planning comments to make this a much more enveloping large presentation. Just a couple comments. So, in terms of like people's understanding of what's happening here, as I do some back of the envelope math, we're not looking at buildings to your specifications, to your level of comfort for this district, less than $300 million. That's what I'm hearing, and that's if we're basically renovating from foundations up, getting that 40% and not leaving ridiculous amounts of money on the table. So I just want to put that out there just to sanity check that. I have back of the envelope closer to $700 million if we were to go all new. I think one of the points you make very well is 40% is what you get. The question is, what's the basis? If it's renovation, the basis is construction. If it's new, the basis is a made up number that's less than half of what's realistic. So we're getting either 40 or less than 20%, really. I want to just mention a couple things that we've noodled at a little bit. We don't want Frankenstein buildings. We don't want buildings that look like they were thrown together haphazard. And listen, our students deserve better than these buildings in this community. And that's where we need to step up as a community and as a board and just admit that. We need to do better for these kids. When they walk in to learn to school in a building that's not up to what we need it to be and the standard that you can get us to, that's not okay. And I think, that has to be said. I know we understand that. I just want to make sure that we just understand that that's what's at stake, right? How people come into school. Love the idea. I think alternative learning spaces, as you're saying, that's going to be a reality. The magnitude of what we need to do in this district, we can't abate the asbestos while children are learning on top of it. I mean, yeah, we're going to need to think about a flexibility just because of the huge amount of work that needs to get done. We didn't talk in this presentation, and so this is actually a question. Mega buildings, should we be thinking about 1 high school, 2 middle schools, 3 elementary schools? Would that, it sounds seismic. I don't think, based on our conversations, is where we're going. I just want to kind of speak a little bit to why that wouldn't be a direction. And I think, we're talking about, we're talking about funding that we can see, touch, and understand. If Oprah Winfrey calls up Dr. Malash and says, I'm gonna be real with you, Joe, I've got $700 million for you, and I'm only gonna pay for new construction, the calculus of this would change. And so, now Dr. Malash, let's just verify that she hasn't made that call, but if that.
She is not, my phone is ready, Mr. Ovadia. I'm always willing to take the call.
That would be a totally different discussion, but we're dealing with, that stuff we can be grounded in. So just really thank you very much. It's been a lot to noodle this. I think people are thinking that, strategic planning knows maybe, whatever it is. It took us a long, but with you as our guide, Mr. Garrison, I think we've, thank you for all this today. And that's it. With that, back to Mrs. Seidel.
Thank you, Mr. Abadia. I did see oh, go ahead.
Do you want me to answer the question?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
That would be
So-
great.
So you make a great point. So I talk about state government in telling us what gross square foot per student there is for the model. Well, guess what? They also have a model population for our elementary, our middle, and our high schools. So for what it's worth, a typical elementary school in New Jersey is 500 students. So that's either pre-K to 5 or K to 5 model. A middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade is 675 students with that 134 gross square foot per student. And a high school is 900 students. So your high schools are already double the state model. So if you were to go, right, to a 4,000 student high school, the Department of Education is probably not going to let you do that in the first place. But it's not that we picked a rabbit out of the hat and decided how big the schools are. We have to follow some semblance to the model in going forward. So there's a guide to doing that to stop some of the mega thinking and which presents busing problems and all the other things that we do. So we look for the model to guide us.
I'm sorry, can you just clarify that and say that again before we so the state has regulations on the sizes that our high schools and middle schools can be?
Yes.
Is there any way we can get that in a follow-up, just what those
sure.
numbers are?
Yeah, there's a model document. So
Yeah, I appreciate that information, thank you.
Even going further with that, an architect doesn't have a blank piece of paper if you say, I want to build a kindergarten classroom. A kindergarten classroom is 950 square feet, has a 50 square foot toilet. A high school classroom is 750 square feet. The superintendent's office, sorry, Joe, is only 200 square feet, okay? So conference rooms are 300. So they micromanage everything that we do. So when our plans go up there and Ms. Dunn looks at them for eligibility, she also looks at the size of it and compares it to the model.
Thank you.
That's fantastic information. Mr. Goodwin, I saw your hand up first and then so go ahead.
Okay. So I guess one of the questions I have, I think number one, this was an excellent presentation, and I think you did a great job presenting the information, new versus renovate. One of the questions I do have though is, can you also talk about the time frame? So like if we're talking about, like if, say for instance, we decided to build East new, what would be the time frame on that? Would that be a 2-year project, a 3-year project? Versus if we're saying we're going to renovate all of East, I know it's significantly less, but also what is that time frame? Is that a 1, 2, 3-year time frame for the renovation? I am curious, like, you know, the dollars are important, but also I think the time frame and based on the time frame, I think it'll help make an easier decision.
Sure. So one of the great, thank you, Mr. Goodwin, for that question. One live example that I have is the new Cumberland County Vocational Technical School. This is a new building down off of 55. It was a $68 million facility, and it took 2 years to build that from scratch. That means we had the infrastructure, utilities there. We built that building. Now let's move over to a renovation and addition program like Maple Shade, New Jersey. In Maple Shade, they were fortunate enough to pass a $50 million program. In there, we had 3 elementary schools and then a middle school, high school. That was an 18-month construction period with 2 different contractors. So one contractor took on the elementary schools, those 3 pieces, and another contractor took on the high school. So you could have different contractors working at different sites. That was 18 months versus the new construction with DeAndrea was 2 years over at Cumberland Tech. So there is going to be different time constraints, but you break the bidding package or the construction package, if you win, into pieces that are palatable for the marketplace. What do I mean by that? We don't go out for $100 million and give that to one contractor and over-attack their abilities to be able to get a project done. There's very few people that have that bonding capability. So things from 50 million or down, that's how you would strategize it, work in this part of the community, that part of the community, and this part of the community. And if you have
Actually, I was talking more about specifically if we're talking about comparing East. So if we're talking about East or talking about Carusi or talking about Kingston, exactly how much time would you estimate? So for renovation, how long would Kingston take? For building it brand new, how long would it take? That's more what I'm referring to.
Sure. So in Kingston, if we were going to renovate the building, it could probably, a small elementary school could be done in a year's time, year and a half. If you're building that from new, it's really 18 months to 24 months. Because think about it, at Kingston, you're starting with the bones of the building. You've got the walls, the roofs, whatever, you've got part of it built. In a new facility, you've got to build that from the ground up. So that's the extra time, difference from new to renovation.
Mrs. Neary.
Thanks. Thank you, Bob, for that. That was really helpful and definitely what we were looking to get for details so that the community could see after the last bond, kind of how it breaks down. I think something that didn't come up before that we were talking about when you have the renovation, versus new construction though, is the maintenance costs. So what are the maintenance costs over time of continuing to maintain a building of that age versus if you build it new, more efficiently to begin with, energy efficient? What do you look at as savings on a building like that over time versus if we just continue to renovate the buildings that we already know are very costly to continue to maintain?
And not to really dodge the question, but if we're doing a total renovation, let's say we're going to go into Kingston and we're going to do almost $14 million. So we're going to do the roof, we're going to do the HVAC system, we're going to do the windows, we're going to do the interior doors, we're going to do the parking lots, we're going to do the bathrooms. All of those systems are going to have warranties or life expectancy going forward. And that life expectancy could be 45 years for a window, could be 30 years for a roof, could be 20 years for an HVAC system. So it would be very similar to the new construction. What you don't get in the renovated program, all right, you have these warranties, and if you did new construction, you still have a 30-year roof, is the point that I'm making. What you don't get is the other efficiencies. The efficiencies of having a blank piece of paper, having a floor plan that not only conforms to the model, but that it's more efficient, and that you can put some different features in that, because with the old building, you may have some waste in square footage and whatnot, so the maintenance costs would be more because you have space that you have to take care of just because it's there and because it's part of the renovations. So efficiencies in new construction are not only the age of the systems that go in, but it's the design of the building can be much more efficient, which saves you money on the back end versus a building like Kingston, which has classrooms that are 680, 720, 900, 1,000, all over the place versus 800, 850, and 950 they have to build to. So I don't know if that answers your question. The efficiencies are with the new design, doing something that's a lot less gross square footage. And you saw that in the formulas, right? So when I went to each of the formulas, you had an existing building square footage and then the new construction component down here. My new construction was less based on the state model than what you have currently to renovate and maintain. That's because these facilities were added on over time, especially at the high schools. You don't need 369,000 square feet. You only need 311. So immediately you've got savings in the differential with that square footage because I don't have these corridors going all over the place for all these additions.
Ms. Friedel?
Hi, thank you, Mr. Garrison, very informative. And I just want to say I've had the pleasure of being in the Cumberland County Vocational Technical School. It's quite amazing, just as a side note. Just a couple of questions. So the last time we were looking at a bond referendum, the architect made a comment at a meeting, and I just want to see if this is accurate and what it would mean. The statement was that if you build from the foundation, from the base, the state looks at that as a renovation as opposed to new construction, and you get the higher reimbursement. So I guess let's take Carusi. If you were to put, all these TCUs out on the fields and knock down Carusi, but then build it on the same footprint, that would be considered a renovation. Is that accurate?
I have not been able to convince the department of building on a foundation. I have convinced the department of building within walls that didn't have a roof area. So in my opinion, building on the foundation, that's a stretch for renovation. I have not done that.
Okay. Jen, just a couple of from the presentation. So in the 3 schools that you presented, you talked about the HVAC system. So I'm just wanting clarification. Are we talking about HVAC building wide, or are we talking about HVAC in certain areas?
Building wide.
Okay, perfect. And then
that includes, if I can expand that comment.
Absolutely.
Building wide means that the district's energy audit, congratulations to the board taking advantage of a state program to have an audit and evaluation of your building, which fed me the age of the 2000 boilers in the addition to 1995 rooftop unit, all that valuable information that came to the district for free. It was a great tool, great turning piece. So what we saw in there is that other than some multi-purpose room units in the elementary schools and some of the HVAC, if you will, in a library here or there that was renovated in 95, or a main office, that the unit ventilators, your classrooms, your bread and butter, were largely original and needed to go. And I think I counted 673 classrooms district-wide, not to mention the hundreds of exhaust fans that have to be replaced as part of this program when you do the roof. And not to mention the fact that your control system is pneumatics or old electronics, not energy efficient. It's not something that we use in the future. So when we talk about HVAC, it's replacing equipment, more efficient, talking about ionization for clean air or UV or whatever the technology is going to go forward, and then controlling it properly with digital controls to save money and be more efficient. That's what we're talking about, a complete makeover, not piecemeal with the dollars that we've assigned.
Great. So I just have two other questions real quick. So with Carusi, we are aware that Carusi has, as you mentioned, asbestos throughout the building. So renovations, if we went a renovation route as opposed to a rebuild, we would have to have all of the students out of the building during the renovation?
We
Or
would close
would it be in wings?
in wings. So as I talked about, most of your plaster, unfortunately, is where your classroom wings are. So when you do the roof replacement, you're going to deal with the ceilings, which deals with the walls, which deals with the floor, which deals with the piping. So what would happen is you would carve off or separate, with physical barriers being constructed, different parts of the building.
Mm-hmm.
The trick in separating a giant U shape, let's say we had a U-shaped building, you say, I only want to take care of these classrooms. The trick in the expense is the fact that the hot water just doesn't run to that wing. It's in the entire loop of the U-shaped area. The electricity is there. So it's not just carving a piece off. The building systems that feed those increment systems have to be separated as well. And that's why it's so expensive.
Gotcha. So my last question is, once in a rare while, grants become available. A dozen years ago, there were grants for example, community schools, to build community schools. If is part of your firm, do you look for opportunities that might be available to assist with funding, or would that fall on the district to be looking for funding that, I mean, I don't even know if it exists in the economy, but you know.
So on two fronts, again, I applaud the district for hiring environmental resolutions. As a site engineer who's giving me a lot of these site numbers and whatever, we've had a bunch of meetings talking about any community block grants, partnership with Cherry Hill Township since they work with them, and if there's anything on that level. Probably not, but that's something that's being researched. My focus in my firm are twofold. Department of Education with the debt service aid, which is the way that we've traditionally funded our schools over time. The fact that the regular operating district, those ROD grants that were the smoke and mirror back in the day, well, that money's all dried up because the SDA did a great job of spending all that money and more in some of the Avid districts. So there's no more one-trick pony ROD grants, coming down because that program has been evaporated. The other area that I focus on for funding is New Jersey Smart. So go back to that energy audit that the district did free of charge. One of the things that the Board of Public Utilities, your tax dollars, your part of your energy bill that you pay in, that convenience tax goes to a kitty up in Trenton to fund the audits and to do grants. Their grant process is in rebates. And those rebates are, you replace your boiler, it's $2,000. Use a high efficiency fan on a motor, that's $500. So I have, under my umbrella in my organization that works with my engineers, an energy consultant that goes up to the BPU, fills out the forms, and in fact, Maple Shade, go back to that 4-building, $48 million. They got a check for, Mr. Blake got a check for $215,000 out of that rebate program because we put LED lighting in, high efficiency motors, high efficiency boilers, and new HVAC equipment, $215 back to the taxpayer. And that's after the job, and it makes everybody feel great, and it makes us do our due diligence.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Friedel. I don't see any other hands at the moment. Yeah, oh,
Yeah, I
Ms.
just
Schultz.
have one. Again, thank you for all the information. I know this is an extraordinary lift on your part, so I appreciate everything. Do you have just an approximate timeline, or I don't know if this is for you or Ben or Mrs. Sugars, but when will you be back with, I guess, your recommendation after reviewing all this information, this presentation, and kind of walking through the schools? I just was curious about like your recommendation back to the board on kind of where we should go after seeing all this information.
So what we're going to do is we're going to go and start peeling away at that 148-page master plan document, because as this broad discussion takes us on a high level new construction or renovation, there are other decisions that need to be made. Are we doing IT infrastructure at all the schools? That's a big number in the 148-page piece. Are we putting multipurpose rooms to equalize them at the elementary schools? That was the same thing last time. Are we going down the road and doing the main office or the main entrance security vestibules? What parking are we going to do? What are some of the other needs? So we've got to start challenging all that. The beauty is I put the giant bucket together at $350, $400 million. Now, if you ask me what are some of the top priorities right now, is absolutely roofing. Warm, safe, and dry. You got to get the buildings and keep the buildings dry, because it doesn't matter if I renovate the bathroom or do an ADA compliance initiative if the roof's leaking and we can't occupy the school. So that's one of the major things that are out there is roof replacement, and we've handicapped that at almost $35 million just as a piece of this overall program. The good news is the district, from a life safety situation, has newer fire alarm systems. Again, a top priority, a level 1 priority from state government. You have a lot of these new systems. It's only one school and then some enhancements at the high school. So by and large, that's been taken care of. Your boiler system. You invested significant money in 04 and 05 for the boiler system. That means that we're going to run the boilers. The unit ventilators are terrible, but at least we can generate hot water and occupy the buildings and keep some semblance of temperature. So fire alarms and boilers, really good things that have been taken care of. Some of the other stuff we need to talk about.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sally, Mrs. Tom?
Okay, here I am. Thank you, Bob, for presenting it tonight. I just have a question about the security vestibule. I know we talked about it earlier. Is this part of the project as well, or we're not doing the security vestibule?
Yes, Sally, that is part of my recommendations, absolutely. Security vestibules for those schools that do not have them, with transaction windows and certain standards, yes.
Okay, is it, I guess I'm trying to find the cost effective, whether having security vestibule or not. If we do it, does it cost money or save money, or it's the same either way, where we do security or not?
Well, the spaces are there in a lot of
Okay.
instances, so it will be a renovation or a reconfiguration. Almost back, not to have a sensitive topic, but back to back, where you go in, you renovate a certain area, you take the adjacent main office, and oh, by the way, let's make the nurse ADA accessible, right? So you have that. In some of the other schools, the main office is on the other side of the outside door, so we have to build a small addition in that instance. So that costs more money when you have to go outside the box. But largely, we'll work inside the box as much as we can.
Okay, so in other words, we're trying to put in the security vestibule, but it does not cost more money, right? Or is it?
Well, it's always going to cost more money whether we renovate it or new construction. What I'm saying is, in some instances, it costs a little more because we have to build new versus renovation.
Right, I'm just trying to, I think my question was, I'm not clear how to ask this question. Like, for example, Thomas Paine, I believe I visited. Before they put the security vestibule, they, the way it is fine. But when we add the security vestibule, we had to put money in. So if we were to go back and do Thomas Paine again, are we going to pay more money for the security vestibule, or we don't even have to touch that part of it? The security vestibule, they've already been built.
Right, so those vestibules that have already been improved, remade, we're not touching those.
Okay, and the one that's not, we are just gonna add more money to what we already doing, add more money to this particular
Right.
space.
And,
Okay.
and try to seek that 40% state aid
Okay,
by using the words ADA compliance and some other words that we'll use in
Okay.
building system renovations.
okay, okay.
All
I
about
just
the
want,
words.
yes, I just want to see how we can save money. But if, I think the last question is, if we, this is just if question, if we don't do the security vest, it doesn't save us any money anyway, right? In that,
If you don't do the security vestibule and you don't
Right.
build new and you don't renovate those areas, then yes, it will be cheaper.
okay, can you then find out how much difference is? I think I would like to know that. I don't know if everybody wants, but I will be interested to find out.
Yes,
Thank you.
I have a
Yes.
line item for every school. So
Yeah,
we
isn't
have-
that already in the I think that's
It's-
already in the detail that you have from
It
the
is,
Friday
but I
packet,
can-
Sally.
But I
Oh,
can
okay.
do it for all schools.
Okay.
I only
That'd
gave
be
you
great.
these.
Okay,
Good. Thank you for that. I think that's all I have right now.
Mr. Avadia?
Yeah, I think, so yeah, thank you, Ms. Tong, that's great information. So I think Mrs. Schultz is asking the right questions. It's the question I have too, right? So what does it mean, right? So Mr. Garrison knows a lot. He's constructed more schools than, gosh, I ever hope to even know about their names, right? So he's an expert. But the question that Mrs. Schultz is asking is, so where do we go? And I think that's the thing about coming to the board today, is that we need to ask one big question first. The question today is, do we believe, I mean, okay, let's say there are some efficiencies with new buildings, but you know, we can shore up the number, but you're talking about a $700 million ask. The people we have to ask are the taxpayers. Am I for, you know, in a world where money is no object, I think we'd all go that direction. Let's get all the efficiencies. But in the world we live in now, you know, COVID has stretched this community, this country, this world to very unsettling points. We can get buildings to Bob's standard for a lot less money, right? For $280, $300 million. We have to decide as a board. Now, it may not be tonight, but by the next session we all get together, we need to give Mr. Garrison some instruction in terms of what model does he want to create. We're from the community. We need to engage the community, as he's saying, but we need to come to some kind of resolution, because once we know that, we can start developing project plans. I think there are people out there in the world that are saying, well, why don't you just start projects? You know, you had them from the first one. Why don't you just throw them on paper? We'll put it out tomorrow. Remember, we can only go for this encompassing size of a bond in 2022, with the first major tranche of work going in summer of 23. So we got to start somewhere. This, at least from a committee level, we felt was an appropriate place to start, but we're going to have to come to some kind of consensus to start building. And I think that's what Mrs. Schultz is alluding to. I think that's the question of the day for us. Where do we feel we can start building something? There's nothing built. So where can we start?
So I think, Mrs. Neary, before we go to you, so we can take some remaining questions, and then we can start with just a straw poll and see what, each board member is thinking as of right now that can guide the next strategic planning discussion and then further detail. So Mrs. Neary, you had a question?
Oh, there we go. Sorry. I think my thinking is, and as we looked at the numbers and we talked about in committee, was obviously the large disparity between the renovation and new construction. And the community, obviously, we don't have $700 million. We don't have $400 million, but we obviously have to do something. I think when I look at some of these buildings, and I would, look to Garrison to help us, and I'm thinking about, say, East, right? That's $81 million as of right now to renovate. And knowing we've spent significant sums of money year over year for probably 35 plus years on that building, does that finally put to bed the bleeding on that building going forward, right? Do we solve many of the structural deficiencies that we've seen when we make that renovation, right? Because that's probably a hard pill for the community to swallow. We want to do it right and be done. And then when somebody walks throughout it, whether it be East or Kingston or Payne or Knight or whatever building it is, that they're no longer, because we did discuss this in committee, right? They're no longer going through and saying, yep, this is the 2000 wing, this is the 94 wing, this is the scary locker room from whatever decade. Like that's not what happens when the community walks through these buildings, and that now they see something cohesive, and we can feel good knowing, that for the money that is spent, we're not going to come back and then say, okay, now we opened up this wall and now we've got to address X, Y, and Z problems from that. So that's the only thing I'm thinking about when we're doing it, whether it be renovation or new. And if new is what needs to be done to remedy something that is deficient, then I would definitely want to know that. Even if it is only one building, then we have to have the uncomfortable conversation. But I know that the community can not bear, $155 million, but that's just something I'm thinking about. And I don't know if we're there yet, Bob, on that, but it's just something that weighs on me.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. So I think what I'd like to do, and parking that there's additional information and additional discussions, like Mrs. Neary just brought up, is just an informal straw poll, go around to each board member and, where you're leaning based on, just solely based on this discussion. Is it renovation or new? I think that's all Mr. Abadi and the strategic planning team and administration is looking for tonight. Again, I know that there's a lot of other factors that play into, more official decisions, but this is just a, informal straw poll just to get an idea of, just based on this first pass of information, where your thoughts are. So I'll sort of kick it off and say that I'm, at least right now, firmly in the renovation camp. Mrs. Neary?
Yep, sorry. Yeah, I would say, oh, did I hit my camera? I'm sorry. I would say renovation, just because 700 million is not going to fall out of the sky.
Got it. Mr. Avadia?
Yep, so I'm in that category too. Renovation. I'd like to, though, empower, and I think we all would, empower Mr. Garrison where there's opportunity to build new, as showcase certain places, schools, wings, where that makes sense to include that in the analysis, but overall a renovation approach, just because of the cost differential.
Yep, and I think that's already in the 3 schools that you shared with us tonight. There are some new components within each of those schools, so
Right,
it sounds like
especially
you're already doing that.
Especially in East.
Right.
Look at the wing that is going to be retired. You have an opportunity, and I sent over to the administration and to the committee a copy of our new Delran robotics studio, where they converted a wood shop and that became a robotics, or the advanced manufacturing that I'm talking about with my Gloucester County clients and also my Camden County clients, as well as makerspace and all the other words that we have, to be able to not just rebuild them 1,200 square foot labs, but do something more creative. Absolutely is part of even at the elementary level.
Great, thank you. Okay, Ms. Schultz?
Yeah, I also would heavily lean towards renovation. And then kind of to Mr. Avadio's point, if there is a building or a school that's an outlier, I would just, obviously lean towards Garrison Architect to call that out, that, this is a building that would not make sense to renovate, and just kind of why. But heavily lean towards renovation.
Thank you. Mrs. Tom?
Sorry. Okay. I am meaning, some renovations, some new buildings, some whatever needs to be done. I think some building that really needs new buildings, I will consider identify some buildings that needs new, and some of them we could hold on renovation so that we can save more money. In overall, I think that's what I would think.
Thank you. Mrs. Matlack?
Thank you. I'm leaning also towards renovation. The sheer magnitude of the cost of building new overall with the amount of buildings that we have is daunting, and I think unbearable for our community to even ask that. But I do believe that we should consider the recommendation of Bob and his team, Garrison, that if they should come across something that it does not make sense to renovate, I think we should be open to that. But across the board, I'm leaning towards renovation.
Thank you. Ms. Friedel?
I really agree with what everybody said, especially Carol's last comment that renovation seems to be the fiscally responsible way to look, especially as Mr. Garrison discussed, that it would be, full systems and walls and doing a comprehensive renovation. But with the caveat that if it does look like something should be new versus a renovation, we should, be considering that as well.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Goodwin?
Yeah, I'm in line with the rest of the board. I definitely think we should be looking at renovation, but definitely if there's something that pops up that it just makes sense, it should be new, and I would think we need to be made aware of that as well. I also had a follow-up question. I don't want to take up time. I mean, when you're done with this, I do have one additional question I want to ask.
No, that's okay. Ask your question. You were the last one to go.
Okay. Well, one of the questions I have is, and I'm assuming this is included, but I just want to ask the question. So, in the cost that you're looking for the renovation, would that also include like replacing doors that are not ADA compliant and all of the facilities, and just making sure that every door, every bathroom, everything in the district at the end will be ADA compliant, at least as of standards today?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. That also includes elevators that need to be modernized with controls that are not in proper heights in our high school and our middle school.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Avadia, it sounds like the board is aligned in, at least today, based on this initial conversation. Renovation seems to be the most fiscally responsible, but if it comes to a point where our experts make a recommendation between Garrison and administration that they would be open to the discussion of new in certain circumstances. So I think you have some marching orders to move forward with strategic planning.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Friedel?
So I actually just have a broader question, and this really, it involves Mr. Garrison, but I think it's more the work of the board. Is before we go too far, when is the plan to start having conversations with the community?
Go ahead, Mr. Avadia.
Yeah, so Ms. Friedel, thanks for bringing that up. Yep, so that's a discussion for January strategic planning. But listening to Bob tonight, and I think just the will of the committee, yeah, whether it's January or February, we're going to have to go out fairly regularly to the community. So that's the case. But the other thing is that, strategic planning as a committee, right? So Lisa's leading the discussion, because once we get to the full board level, we almost disappear and we just become a board of 9 people where Lisa or where Mrs. Seidel is leading us. So, there's a lot to tee up by the committee. We got to bring that to the board. By extension, we present that to the community, but that's not really enough to engage the community. That just fills them in and makes them part of the discussion. So it's a big topic, and it's one we got to tackle in January. January is one of those meetings that just feels like it should be a 5-hour meeting, and I don't know if we have that in us. But anyway, we're gonna do our best. We're gonna do our best to answer that question.
And I think just to add to that, I know one of the things that I was most excited that Garrison brought to the table was your community involvement. And how heavily invested you are in working with districts to effectively communicate with the community. So, I'd love to hear, and even if not tonight, but at the next strategic planning meeting, some of your recommendations for how we best engage the community in these types of discussions. But I know that that is one area of expertise for your firm.
And the voting is changing with the mail-in ballots, but we won't talk about that right now.
Right.
That's strategy.
Okay, so I don't see any more hands, so I know, Mr. Buddy, we're gonna hear from you a little later, and you'll tell us what else is going on in strategic planning. But again, I wanna thank you, Mr. Garrison. That is a really great presentation, and I think it was a really great discussion. Dr. Malash or Mr. Sugars, do you have anything to add?
I would agree with the board. I'm very appreciative of Mr. Garrison and his team, the hours and days that they have spent in district, since the springtime, balancing the challenge of the pandemic for themselves and for their staff and working with our staff. Definitely, I think, an incredibly valuable conversation among the board tonight. The direction and what the board wants to do and where the board wants to go is so critically important for what we're doing administratively as we look at what needs to be done. There are so many needs that are incredibly clear, right? And Bob is spelling out, and again, the team is laying all that out for us. So I'm looking forward to the ongoing discussions. I'm looking forward to different ways to engage the community and perspective sharing and information sharing. And it's going to be a busy next 18 to 20 months for sure about where we are and where we're going.
Yes. Mrs. Sugars?
I think that the committee has been doing a lot of really good work, and we've had a very organized schedule moving forward of topics, and Mr. Garrison has been joining us each meeting, and so we've been able to have some really good discussions in a very kind of organized, laid out manner, which I think is critical because the amount of information that we need to cover and the amount of decisions that need to be made. So looking forward to getting through the rest of this year and then sort of being able to move ahead with what the plan is.
Great. All right, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's good to spend time with you all. Be safe. It's good to see everybody.
Thank you for coming, Bob.
Thank you for coming in.
And as I say, we got to keep the faith, right?
Right.
That's the only way we're going to get by. All right.
Thank you. Happy
See you,
holidays.
Bob.
Same to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so that moves us into correspondence. By show of hands, does anyone have correspondence to share with us tonight? All right, Mrs. Matlack, I saw your hand first.
Thank you. I do. On Saturday, I attended the legislative committee meeting of New Jersey school boards. For those who are not familiar, since these meetings only occur 4 times a year, I am the District 6, one of 2 District 6 legislative representatives on the state committee to the New Jersey school boards. It's an appointed position, and they meet 4 times a year. So we met on Saturday for about 3 hours. So I will just highlight some of the important things from that meeting. Let's see, there was a guest speaker, Mark Magyar, who was the Associate Executive Director for the New Jersey State Democratic Office. And some of the highlights of what he spoke about the pilot programs for county school districts, that there are some school districts that are piloting. It is strictly under local control, and those districts who want to pilot something like a county school district can do so. Let's see. There's some regulations according to, that will tell districts whether or not they can consolidate. And I can send the board the link to all of that. There is also some funding money available to districts who are looking to do that. And so that was what he spoke about. We had state legislative updates. Jonathan Pushman, who is the New Jersey School Board's Director of Governmental Relations, gave us an update. I have, it's 4 pages of updates that I will share with the board. I will give it to Dr. Malash and he can put it in our Friday memo so you can read all of it. I will just highlight 2 things from that update. One is the New Jersey School Board Association Pandemic Advocacy Agenda. And they talk about what New Jersey School Boards is advocating on our behalf in the state of New Jersey in order to get us monetary relief and anything else that we may need during this pandemic. So during Delegates Assembly and during these county state meetings that I attend and during the legislative committee meetings is when districts bring their concerns forward. And if there are enough districts who are expressing similar concerns, then the school boards takes up that under consideration if they want, if they want to and how they want to advocate on our behalf for us. One of the things that they also mentioned and that they have been advocating on our behalf is for CUSAC relief and flexibility. The first, what was first submitted was rejected by the governor, and therefore we have to go through that CUSAC process, which is the Quality Single Accountability Continuum Review. There's another piece of legislation, and I'll give you the bill numbers, but this will also be in the packet. It's A4975 S3187. And that was on the assembly floor, and today it was on the Senate committee hearing was held. No, today's the 8th, so it was held yesterday on this. And Jonathan said he expected that to go through, and that would give some CUSAC requirement relief. Let me just get my other notes. If it goes through, high-performing districts would get a pass, but they would be able to stay in the same cohort and not have to do it again until 2023. As I said, they expect it to pass. Doesn't mean that it will, but that's what their expectation is. If districts are already in the process and they choose to complete the process, if this should go through and they can get a pass, if they should choose to complete the process, they would be able to complete the process. So I have not heard today whether that happened or not. So hopefully by Friday we will know what that is and can pass that along. So those are the things I just wanted to share, and I'll make sure that the rest of the information is in our Friday packet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Matlack. Anyone else? Okay. Okay, if no other correspondence, then that brings us into our first public comment period. First public comment period is for items that are on the agenda. Tonight, we're going to start with the people that are on with us tonight, followed by any that we received in writing as of noon today, and Mrs. Sugars will read those after. To submit a public comment by speaking, when you're prompted, please state your name, your address, and your agenda item that you're talking about. You can click the raise hand button in the bottom bar of the meeting or dial *9 to raise your hand by phone. You'll be called on by name or identified via phone. You'll receive a prompt on your screen asking if you want to unmute. If you're joining by phone, please dial *6 to unmute your phone, and you'll have 3 minutes. At the end of those 3 minutes, you will be muted. So I'm going to go in order of what I see on the screen. I'm going to start with Mindy Rosen.
Hi, Mindy Rosen. I'm reading this for Jen Nadio, 224 North Madison Avenue. Throughout the first 3 years as president of Cherry Hill Special Ed PTA, our board had to beg for meetings with Mrs. Wethington and team. During the meetings, the team either did not reply to our questions or didn't follow up. It's been a struggle to be seen as stakeholders. In 2018, Giuseppe learned we were supposed to be invited to ESSA meetings. A review found that Mrs. Wethington forgot to invite us. Again, in 2020, Mrs. Wethington forgot to invite Giuseppe to the ESSA meeting. Due to the roadblocks, Giuseppe filed a complaint in 2018 with the DOE as the district was not using Giuseppe as the CPAG, but Dr. Maloche told everyone that we were the district CPAG. Mrs. Wethington told the state of New Jersey there was no district CPAG, and the state advised she was in non-compliance. Then Mrs. Wethington sent an email to every family in the district asking for members of the new district-driven CPAG, and she handpicked members of this team. She tried to dismantle Giuseppe, but as a PTA, we continue to advocate for our families. This new assistant superintendent position will encompass equity in our district, and yet I have never seen Mrs. Wethington at a cultural proficiency meeting stand up with Giuseppe members on ADA required state changes in the district or create opportunities for equity. On November 24, 2020, Giuseppe met with Mrs. Wethington and her team to discuss students struggling during remote. They stated the supervisors, not herself, have received emails from families explaining struggles since March. However, families have sent Giuseppe their correspondence showing the district responded. While in recent days, she has been more collaborative with Giuseppe, that has not always been the case. Can this Board of Ed state that they have not received letters from parents of students in special education struggling with remote? I certainly cannot. Dr. Malash and I met on November 23rd, 2020 to discuss Giuseppe's call to action regarding the lack of leadership in the special ed department. During our Zoom call, he was looking forward to the 2 new assistant superintendents and 1 director of special education positions that would be approved by the Board of Ed on November 24th, 2020. How is it that I read the agenda for tonight that says Mrs. Wethington and Dr. Mahan are going to be put into these positions when the Board of Ed just approved the openings on November 24th? Was there a national search for these positions? Is Mrs. Wethington a qualified candidate for this role? On behalf of my fellow advocates and parents of children with special educations, please conduct a national search for all 3 positions. Our students require better than what they are receiving right now.
Thank you, Mrs. Rosen.
So that was Jen Nadio's speech.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next we have, and I apologize if I'm not getting the name right, I'm kind of far from the screen, Karen Ball or Bell.
Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay, so I'm speaking as to the same topic, the appointment of Mrs. Wethington. This is from my personal interaction. I think these are things that everybody really knows, but they need to be stated in public. So from my personal interactions, I'm not satisfied with the job Ms. Wethington is doing for students. This is because I do not believe she's complying with timelines and policies. So I don't believe she is complying with timelines and policies. I do not believe she's developing a spirit of cooperations with families. I do not believe she is developing a spirit of cooperation in families. I do not support Ms. Wethington for assistant superintendent for the entire district. I don't think it's a smart decision if there are going to be many people speaking out that we add more when there's so many difficulties already that our parents are experiencing. I want to say overall that I don't want the tone of our district to be set by what I have experienced and other parents have experienced. I don't think that kind of tone is acceptable. I think that the board seriously has to consider what kind of tone and how they want their parents treated. And in addition, the board needs to consider that how they're treated is very different than how the average parent is treated. Saying that, I'd like to commend all of my children's teachers. They're working so hard every day And I'm so impressed and I'm so proud that the children have this opportunity to be with them. And as a family, we're very, very thankful. Thanks for letting me talk.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Jamie Goodwin.
Hi, Jamie Goodwin, 112 Mansfield Boulevard South. I wanted to just briefly have a comment around curriculum and instruction, and that we're going to get that update. I wanted to see if it was possible to, as actually a lot of people have already mentioned around special education, but more in general, is there an update on how equity is being done in the community? Because there has been a series of things that Yeah.
Your comment is more appropriate for the second public comment period.
So I'm actually asking if that is it. I don't know if it's said or not, but I wanted to have that as a precedent, whether or not we can continue to talk about equity in that conversation that's coming up in curriculum and instruction. So that's sort of where my comment is coming from, because there's a lot of, so not just generally, but in this sort of update, is it included a conversation about how equity is being done? Because I just worry that a lot of parents are having conversations and it's all being separate. It's individual. So I'm wondering if there's going to be a group collective conversation about the equity that's sort of happening across the district, both in conversation of special education, but also in Black and Brown communities, like around race, because a lot of kids are suffering. And so I'm just wondering if that's in the update. So that's sort of where the comment is connected to the upcoming section.
Okay, thank you very much for your comment. Next, I see a hand up for Nick B.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll be also speaking on agenda item 13.1 of tonight. My name is Nick Bevid. It's 1213 Cropwell Road. At a time when students with special needs and their families are suffering disproportionately due to this district's one-size-fits-all policies during the pandemic, it is astounding that the superintendent sees fit to recommend any of his staff for a major promotion, let alone someone who is currently in charge of special education services in the district. Yet here we are. Looking at the likely prospect of a year or more with no significant in-person instruction for special needs students, and the district digging in more day by day on its unwillingness to work with us on solutions, and with the board apparently ready to rubber stamp Superintendent Malash's recommendation to elevate the top special education administrator to the new position of Assistant Superintendent of Compliance, Equity, and Student Services. Under Superintendent Malash's administration, the Cherry Hill School District has a well-earned reputation for being particularly litigious, rigid, and adversarial with parents of special needs students. That approach makes the everyday challenges these families face even more daunting. And the continuation of those practices during the pandemic has been absolutely devastating. We've been pleading for the district to work with us and to look at innovative solutions, only to be rebuffed at every turn with canned talking points from the superintendent that shows a level of disconnect that is truly alarming. This promotion not only validates this callous and harmful approach, but would seem to solidify it for years to come. Superintendent Malash continues to be Cherry Hill's version of Nero, fiddling while students and families scramble, struggle, and deal with the fallout of his actions. We ask the board to play the role it was elected to do and provide a check on his power and deny this recommended promotion until we have real solutions for students with special needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Lauren Greenberg.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, Lauren Greenberg, 508 Bryan Drive. I'm going to be speaking on also same topic, the appointments of those assistant superintendent positions and also the return to learn plan. My three children are third generation students of the Cherry Hill Public School District. Both of my parents graduated from Cherry Hill West, and I graduated from Cherry Hill East. I was so excited to return to Cherry Hill to raise my family and give my kids the same outstanding public school education that my parents and I received. My story is not unique. Many of my former Cherry Hill classmates now have children in the Cherry Hill public schools. One of the reasons we all came back to the area is because of the outstanding public school system. Many of us are now disappointed and regret that decision. We clearly had no idea how badly the current administration and Board of Education has fractured the school community. I was surprised to see on tonight's agenda the creation of 2 new top administrative positions and the appointment of 2 current administrators to those positions. The creation of 2 new top administrative positions at a time when the district's administration, staffed by the same individuals, is struggling to collaborate and communicate well with teachers and parents is incredibly tone deaf and indicates a concerning level of misjudgment. It's unclear why these positions are so crucial to create now, particularly when we don't even have enough funding to repair our crumbling buildings or upgrade our HVAC systems. But if they are, there should be an interview process that seeks external applicants as well. The promotion of Ms. Wethington in particular ignores the well-documented obstacles that hundreds of families in Cherry Hill encounter every year to get their children with special needs matched with appropriate services. It says quite loudly that their continually voiced concerns are not being heard, or worse yet, not being listened to. Finally, on Return to Learn, it is quite obvious that leadership did very little over the summer to make the teachers, who are our greatest asset, feel safe teaching in the schools and to prepare them for teaching in a hybrid model. This lack of preparation is causing the situation we are in now. As neighboring districts spent the last 3 months learning in the classroom when COVID-19 numbers were lower and more learning could have been conducted outdoors, Cherry Hill Public School doors remain closed, causing our students to struggle and fall behind. This should be concerning to the administration and the entire community, as this will ultimately cause Cherry Hill Public Schools to be ranked lower than the surrounding districts, causing a ripple effect on property values and taxes. Once again, Cherry Hill Public School is in a reactive situation instead of a proactive situation. Those of you on the Board of Education with children in this school district, particularly special needs and elementary age students, how can you sit silently at every board meeting and just accept the status quo? Why aren't you pushing back and challenging leadership when it's clear that the status quo is not working? Don't you want better for your own children? All 11,000 students in this district deserve much better than what they are getting today. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Miriam Stern.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Great, thank you. Miriam Stern, 121 Ashford Road. In a district of this size, 20% of our students have IEPs or 504s. That means approximately 2,100 students have some type of identified special need. A high-level position such as assistant superintendent warrants a thorough search for the best candidate to lead the district, to find that person who can modernize our approach to special education. Our special education families like mine, face unique hardships that must have an administrator who approaches providing special ed services with empathy, as well as having a focus on true compliance. Cherry Hill Public Schools is out of compliance with federal mandates for providing all students with services in the least restrictive environment. That means, for example, our district should be providing the highest level classes that our students are capable of taking, even those students with special needs. Currently, our district refuses to provide supports for our students in high school with special needs who would like to take honors classes, those in-class resources classes. Time and time again, our special ed department has played an adversarial role against many parents. And time again, Cherry Hill Public Schools, when doing so and goes to court, loses the fight in court. I've heard so many stories. I know so many families who've been through that. We need to have somebody at the helm who will advocate for equity for all of our students, including our students with special needs. Given that our district no longer even has a functioning parent advocacy group because of the district's move to remove the Cherry Hill Special Ed PTA several years ago from being that group, we absolutely must start to look at how we are treating these families, how we are treating these advocacy groups. It is required by state law that we have an advocacy group that is involved in some of the decision making. and has a say in the way our district approaches leadership for special ed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Kim Gallagher.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, 1537 Hillside Drive. So 5.5 years ago, my husband and I looked for a house in southern New Jersey, and I knew that I wanted to live in Cherry Hill because of the school districts. However, 5.5 years ago, or 5.5 years later, I regret this decision. Had I moved to any other surrounding district, my daughter would have had months of in-person education at this point. While I understand we are in unprecedented times, the district's lack of ability to mobilize and provide in-person learning highlights the dysfunction of leadership, specifically the superintendent and the Board of Education. You have clearly not made an environment where teachers and staff feel confident to return to learn. The lack of understanding, the lack of leadership is obvious now. We see it in the vacillation, late changes to the return to learn schedule, and the vague and condescending messages to the community. What you don't understand is that you need to explain your reasons and take responsibility for your decisions. All of your correspondence does is pass the buck and deflect. Remember, power brings responsibility and accountability, two characteristics you lack. Finally, the leadership's lack of regard for the parents is disgusting and obvious. Your silence is unacceptable, but your lack of answers is intolerable. What you have failed to recognize is the pain and anguish you have put on the families of this community. Children deserve an education, and the taxes we pay mean we expect a high standard. The product you have provided from September is a joke. My daughter is lucky to get 90 minutes of live instruction every day, and when I bring it to everyone's attention, I am the one criticized, not the people who deserve the criticism. My emails should encourage the district to take action to change this, but unfortunately it does not. I was told by the president of the Board of Education not to email her with my issues. What I want to say to her is that my daughter is the person you are here to advocate for. If you don't want to hear the issues we are facing, why are you here? Step down and allow someone who cares to take your place. Clearly, while the times are good, the district's dysfunction was easier to hide. But now that the tide is out, we see the lack of leadership and dysfunction in plain sight. The parents deserve empathy in this moment. You have put the burden on us and yet removed our voice from the conversation. I refuse to sit silently as you ruin this district and leave the children behind who deserve a better response from you. Get our children back in school now so that the parents, specifically mothers, can return to work and regain some sanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Sugars to read any comments she received for first public comment via email.
To start, we have 14 comments. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, approximately 5 will be read in first comment. The first one is from Jalissa Maldonado. She is the parent, she is the mother of 3 students. All of her students are in the Cherry Hill District. It has been brought to her attention that LaCoya Weddington is up for the position of assistant superintendent. Since she cannot attend the board meeting today, I'm writing, if you will submit my vote for me, I would like to submit my vote and oppose this action. Thank you for your comment. The next one we have is from Kelly Gasly, 501 Gateway Drive. I was surprised to see on today's agenda the creation of 2 top administrative positions and the appointment of 2 current administrators to those positions. I had understood that action items in a work session special agenda meeting are supposed to be urgent and time sensitive matters. Can be explained why this is urgent or time sensitive. Further, the creation of 2 new top administrative positions at a time when the district's administration staffed by the same individuals is struggling to collaborate and communicate well with teachers and parents is incredibly tone deafening. It indicates a concerning level of misjudgment. It's unclear why these positions are so crucial to create now. If they are, there should be an interview process that seeks external applicants as well. The promotion of Ms. Weddington in particular ignores the well-documented obstacles that hundreds of families in Cherry Hill encounter every year to get their children with special needs matched with appropriate services. It says quite loudly that their continually voiced concerns are not heard or worse yet, are not being listened to. Finally, on return to learn, Dr. Malash, the administration and the school board continue not to provide any clear, authentic information on why a tiered approach to returning to in-person learning is not being implemented. Last Friday's postcard did not address this issue at all, and yet is at the forefront of the problems with remote learning. In a district of 11,000 students, it no longer makes sense to treat high school students the same as first graders. There's mounting data that in-school transmission is not occurring, especially in small classroom settings. New York City public schools have shifted their approach yet again, returned students to buildings from pre-K to fifth grade. When Cherry Hill shifted its approach, there is no information being shared. We are in the dark. What is needed for our special education elementary students to receive 2 days of learning in person?
You're asking just a little bit.
Sorry.
If you could just be a little louder
Oh,
in
I'm
future
sorry.
comments.
Sure. So the next comment, we already heard from Mrs. Gallagher tonight. We also have 2 comments, one from Steve Tulo and one from Andrew Bush that are essentially the same comments. I'm only going to read one of them. This is in response to the promotions of Dr. Mahan and Mrs. Weddington at a time when students with special needs and their families are suffering disproportionately due to the district's one-size-fits-all policies during this pandemic. It is astounding that the superintendent sees fit to recommend any of his staff for a major promotion, let alone someone who is currently in charge of special education services in the district. Yet here we are looking at the likely prospect of a year or more with no significant in-person instruction for special needs students. And the district is digging in more by the day on its unwillingness to work with us on solutions. And the board apparently ready to rubber stamp Superintendent Malash's recommendations to elevate the top special education administrator to a new position of Assistant Superintendent of Compliance, Equity, and Student Services. Under Superintendent Malash's administration, the Cherry Hill School District has a well-earned reputation for being particularly litigious, rigid, and adversarial with parents of special needs students. That approach makes the everyday challenges these families face even more daunting, and the continuation of those practices during the pandemic has been absolutely devastating. We've been pleading for the district to work with us and to look at our innovative solutions, only to be rebuffed at every turn with canned talking points from the superintendent that shows a level of disconnect that is truly alarming. This promotion not only validates this callous and harmful approach, but would seem to solidify it for years to come. We ask the board to play the role it was elected to do and provide a check on the superintendent's power and deny this recommended promotion until we have real solutions for students with special needs. Please open these jobs up to the public. Wait on any votes. Our next comment is from Eliza Babcock, 119 Nantucket Drive. In the agenda, there are 2 appointments listed under other motions for the appointment of 2 new assistant superintendents. While I personally have no issue with either Ms. Mahan or Ms. Weddington's candidacy, I am shocked that the district would choose not to publicly advertise the 2 positions and seek as many highly qualified candidates as possible. I believe an outside search would be fair and would give the public more time to evaluate their opinion and make their voices heard regarding the choices for the positions. Our children and our community deserve this. One moment. Kristen Biglietta, 2 Chateau Drive. My comment is about motion 19.6, other motions. The recent history in Cherry Hill Public Schools hiring of assistant superintendents has been to do searches that include candidates from outside of the district. As in the past 2 candidates searches, CHPS has hired outside candidates Justin Smith and Joe Campisi. After completing the interview and hiring process, our district felt that the strongest candidates came from the outside and not within. We live in arguably the best state in the nation for public education. We are the 11th largest district in the state. Cherry Hill has the potential to easily draw the best of the best to our district without question. It is astounding and respectfully appears irresponsible that the conclusion being drawn that Ms. Weddington and Dr. Mahan are the best of the best without doing a public search. After doing a thorough candidate search, it may be that the chips fall that one or both are in fact the best candidate or candidates. Or it may be that the chips fall that one is or both are not.
But when we are talking about the education of 11,000 extremely diverse children, isn't it worth the time and effort to ensure that these kids are given the best possible leaders in our district, hands down, especially when it comes to equity, especially when it comes to progressive curriculum development for our students? If a corporation comparable to our district size and impact chose to promote from within without facilitating a search for the best and brightest, you'd likely question whether or not they actually made the best possible hires. It seems very obvious that the same logic should absolutely be applied to CHIP's hiring process of these two extremely important administrators. My hope is that the BOE will not approve the motion 19.6 other motions, and subsequently that they'll request that a thorough and proper candidate search be allowed to take place so that we can be assured that our district is being led by the best and the brightest. I want that for my two children without question. Don't you want it for yours? And don't you want that for our 11,000 CHIPS, students CHIPS serves? And one more. Sorry. That's all for now. Oh, finish them up in the next one.
Thank you. Okay, so that moves us into our work session, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Matlack to share the curriculum and instruction committee notes.
Thank you, Mrs. Seidel. The
Mrs.
CMI
Matlack?
committee met on Monday, November 30th, and we had 4 items on our agenda. The first was the course of study booklet, and we had a presentation by Mr. Goldthorpe and Mr. Wisely on increasing opportunities for high school science. It was a collaborative effort with East and West, with Dr. Perry and Dr. Burns. And the purpose of this is to design a suite of science electives to engage students in real-world driven instruction. The curriculums will use a collaborative consultation model, and it allows for the general education and special education teacher to utilize their area of expertise. The general ed teacher as the content expert, and the special ed teacher as the expert in strategies and support. It will increase special education services from half-time ICR, which is in-class resource, to full-time ICR in biology, chemistry, and physics. The new elective courses will be accessible for all students. The new courses will be non-leveled, and there will be no prerequisites. They will be semester courses at 2.5 credits each. Some of the proposed courses have very intriguing titles, and many of us on the committee, we're very eager to hear their development. So some of the courses are infectious disease, GIS, which is geographic information system mapping, natural disasters, and extreme weather meteorology. We asked about staffing, additional staffing, and it said that we were told that no additional staffing is anticipated, but there may be a possible reallocation of staff as certifications would allow. And the timeline for these courses is for the information to be shared with the community and course selection in January 2021. And on February 12th in next year, we will have a district in service day and professional development for teachers on implementing the consultative model for both the general education teachers and the special education teachers. And the next summer of 2021, curriculum development for these new STEM electives will take place. We got the Social Justice Committee. There was an update. The Social Justice course that they are working on, the proposed title for that course is The Fight for Social Justice, Past and Present. The committee also received, or the district received the contracts from the professors from the 3 universities we are partnering with on this work. They're from Penn, Monmouth, and Stockton. The first meeting of those professionals, those professors, occurred today, December 8th, with the teachers and administrators, and they will meet next week with the students. And we anticipate being able to implement the social justice course and the African American history course in September of 2021, for next school year. Next item agenda was the Black History Month essay poster video contest and the Black History Month program. Again, this year, that's going to be sponsored by the Cherry Hill African American Civic Association, and that has been run and will continue to be run by Mrs. Jenkins. And the theme this year is the history of voting for African Americans in America. And the Black History Month program will look different this year given the virus and restrictions, but regardless of how it occurs, it will occur. It's scheduled to occur on February 23rd. Our last item was the Return to Learn plan. And the day we met was the November 30th. And that was the day we went back to full remote. And so there were just a couple of statistics that Dr. Mahan had given us that I will share, and then I will turn it over to Dr. Mahan if she has anything to add. So the district has deployed over 700 laptops to teachers in place of the Chromebooks to assist with the remote virtual learning. Webcams have also been distributed and cameras installed to make that go a little easier for the teachers and the students. Over 100 noise canceling headsets for co-teachers and special education class teachers have been distributed to assist with their teaching. And then in anticipation of our students coming back, additional student dividers have been distributed. And just as a note of some kudos to one of our staff members, Heather Esposito will present at a national conference. And I did not get all of the information, so maybe Dr. Mahan can fill us in on the rest of that. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Mahan to add anything else for us.
Mrs. Matlack, thank you. Heather Esposito is the district technology coach, and she presented at the National ISTE conference, which is a technology-based conference, along with her colleague, Alicia DeMarco. They did a presentation on supporting, I believe, technology in the remote environment. They have both been leaders in the field and have partnered previously to present at national conferences. So huge kudos out to Alicia and to Heather. Over the last few years, members of our teaching staff as well as administrative staff have presented at, I would say, over 20 national conferences to put Cherry Hill on the map and to share what we are doing as a school district with others around the country. So kudos to them. And the only other thing that I will add is that Scott Goldthorpe, who is a supervisor of curriculum and instruction, as well as Mr. Mark Wisely, who is a supervisor of pupil services, are both on the call if there are any questions regarding the science proposal. But thank you. I think you covered everything else on the agenda.
Great, thank you very much. If there are any committee members who have anything to add. Okay, if any board members have any questions or comments, we can entertain those now. Mr. Ovadia.
Yes, so Mrs. Matlack, thank you very much for that report, Dr. Mahan. So first of all, I think it's great to lean into remote and tech and what we're learning in kind of a strengths-based approach. You know, so often when you're thinking about remote learning, we're looking at deficit, and there's another side of it. Wonderful, Ms. Esposito has been recognized and teaching at a national conference. So ICR, it sounds like great news on the science side. Talk to us about, so what is that? Can we delve a little bit more into, so that means they're going to be full-time ICR, there were part-time, that means that more classes have ICR. What does that look like? It sounds like really good news. I just want to make sure I understand it.
So Mr. Goldthorpe and Mr. Wisely, if you'd like to bring your cameras up so that the board members can see you. And Mr. Goldthorpe, if you'd like to start with a response to Mr. Avadia's question.
Sure. So currently in our high school required science courses of biology, chemistry, and physics, the ICR support is offered at a half-time model, which is 2 out of the 4 class meetings every 6-day cycle. And this proposal increases that to a full-time model. So every time the class meets, the special education teacher would be in the class co-teaching with the general education teacher. And I will also include Mr. Wisely if he has anything to add there that I missed, as he is our special education expert.
Thank you, Mr. Goldthorpe. So just to kind of outline some of the benefits of that, obviously there's the natural benefit of going from half-time to full-time. But when we start to really look at what that means for our students and for our teachers, it gives our teachers increased opportunities to implement some of the research-based best practices in special education as it relates to co-teaching models. So oftentimes with a part-time model, our staff is relegated to a one teach, one assist model of co-teaching. And there are other models out there that will allow us to further differentiate instruction for our students by moving to the full-time.
So thank you. That is very helpful, and I think I was right to identify it's good news. Let me ask you. So when we've identified this model in science, are there other areas on the frontier that we should be looking at where perhaps something similar would be worth considering on a CNI side?
So I guess I can jump in here with that one and say that we are looking to develop a model process with science, and then looking to expand that across other content areas in the future.
Dr. Mahan, maybe you could also, a few months ago, we had a presentation about the co-teaching model and the evaluation that was done of our co-teaching model at the elementary level. And some of the board members may remember that, but there's also an awful lot of information that comes through. So if you could very briefly, we already have, an established program in that for our younger students.
So thank you, Mrs. Matlack. In was it September? Marianne Joseph, who is a consultant that's been working with the district, participated in our curriculum and instruction committee meeting and shared data that she'd taken after working with the district for 4 or 5 years with co-teachers. So we have 5 designated co-teaching buildings. She's worked with teachers in all of those buildings to help them improve the model of co-teaching. And based on her data, you can see that the shift has occurred from the more traditional one teacher teaching and leading and the other supporting to really inventive, all together, working as a team, co-teaching. So we are going to be utilizing Mrs. Joseph at the high school level. She's currently working at High School West, doing some support with ICR teachers, not co-teachers as we define at the elementary level. So she will continue that work with us.
Thank you, Mrs. Wethington.
Certainly.
Any other questions? Mrs. Friedel.
Just one question. So to move to the full-time ICR, I would think will increase the number of special ed certified teachers that would be needed, since they are now covering multiple classes to be assigned to one class, or would the classes be reshifted in some way?
Ms. Friedel, I think Mr. Wisely probably has some data on that. I think he can jump in and assist.
Yes, Ms. Friedel, thank you for asking that question. So as part of this model, as Ms. Matlock kind of articulated, is we are moving to a consultative model for our concepts level classes, or what's known as our resource replacement classes. The consultative model will involve a general education teacher assuming the daily instruction responsibilities, but will receive consultation from a special education teacher to ensure that accommodations and modifications are consistently met within that setting. So that will allow us to staff our in-class resource at full time and still meet the needs of our students within the resource replacement setting as well.
And Mrs. Friedel, Mr. Goldthorpe, I don't know if you want to jump in here regarding number of sections for certified teachers in science.
Sure. So just as a point of information, currently at High School East, we've got 25 full-time science teachers, and at West, we have 14 full-time science teachers.
So it's 8 o'clock. It's a long day. So just to go back, so are you saying that the forgive my word, but resource room are turning to consultative models? So instead of a special ed teacher in those rooms, it would be a gen ed with consultation from a special ed teacher.
That is correct. The primary instruction responsibility will fall to the general education teacher, and they will receive consultation from a special education teacher to ensure that those accommodations and modifications are met. So that consultation will occur both in the classroom and through common preps as well as PLC time.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I heard that correctly. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And one of the questions from one of the committee members when we met was other school district success in using this model. And I do recall that Mr. Wisely and Mr. Goldthorpe, talked about that, and that the districts that they looked at and will continue to look at, how they are implementing this model and the success that they're having. So I just want to share that as well. Are there any other questions?
Can I ask one more? I'm sorry.
Sure.
So has there been any consultation with the teachers, the resource teachers, the gen ed teachers on their thoughts of implementing, I'm particularly interested in the resource room going from to a consultative model, and what they think of that model and the potential outcomes. Not that will, but I think that their voice should be part of it. So is that part of this process?
So Mr. Goldthorpe and, I'm sorry, Mrs. Wethington, go ahead.
I was just going to say that we have met with teachers. We'll continue to meet with teachers. We've also met with special education, parent groups, CHSEPTA, and the CPAG.
Thank you so much.
I was going to chime in because I think it's important to highlight the amount of collaboration and communication across all of the different departments and school buildings in this process. And Mr. Goldthorpe and Mr. Wisely coordinated a very detailed meeting to outline this plan with teaching staff and administrators. And I do think one of you, if you could please just highlight that meeting and the coordination and coming together of members across the school district.
Sure, I'll jump in. Thanks, Dr. Mahan. So we did, Mark and I had the opportunity to meet with staff members and administrators to share the proposal last week, as well as meeting with both of the CHSEPTA and CPAG groups. So it's really been a collaborative effort, and thinking about our next steps on the curriculum side is to convene a special education curriculum committee to work with the science curriculum committee to really further flesh out what the courses look like and how those collaborative consultations will work.
Thank you so much. That's great news.
You're welcome.
And Mrs. Matlack, can I add one more
Yes,
thing? Just
absolutely.
a special thank you to the CPAG and to CHSEPTA. They provided some really fantastic, very useful feedback for us, things we certainly had not thought about as practitioners. So having that parent perspective really has helped. So just a special thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Any other board member comments or questions?
I don't see any hands, Mrs. Matlack.
Okay, that's all I have. I'd just like to thank Mr. Wisely and Mr. Goldthorpe for coming in and sharing your perspective again with us tonight, just as thoroughly as you did with the committee last week. I appreciate that. And I appreciate Dr. Mahan and Mrs. Wethington's input as well. Back to you, Mrs. Seidel.
Thank you. Okay, next up, I'm going to ask Ms. Schultz to share the Business and Facilities Committee meeting update with us.
Thank you, Mrs. Seidel. So the Business and Facilities Committee, we met December 1st at 6 p.m. And at our meeting, we were joined by Mike Holt and Andrew Lee to review certain highlights from a draft copy of our comprehensive annual financial report. And just kind of before I get into the meeting, I definitely want to make sure that I give a huge congratulations to Mrs. Sugars and her entire team. The district also received another stellar report this year. We had no comments, no recommendations, and no action plan needed on our initial findings from Mr. Holt and Andrew Lee. So again, this was just a draft copy of this comprehensive report. The report is not finalized at this point. There is some additional information that is needed from the state. I think we're specifically still waiting on GASB 75 information. But even with that information, we still don't see any changes to the comments, the recommendations, or the action plan recommendation. So the deadline for the submission for the audit for the 2019-2020 school year, it has been moved 60 days to February 5th, 2021. And they do anticipate that they will have our audits submitted well before this deadline. The district, again, is going to be receiving an unmodified opinion on the financial statements. This is the highest opinion that can be received. So we quickly did review, we reviewed a focus on the general funds. They stated that our district is in very good financial condition. We were able to set aside additional money in our capital reserve account while still maintaining the maximum fund balance permissible, which was 2% of the operating expenses. And a good call out that there is a pending bill that will allow the district to maintain a 4% fund balance for the 2021 school year, and that is due to the pandemic situation. So just a couple key highlights, but just important to note that Mike and Andrew will return to present the audit to the full board once it's finalized and submitted to the state. So they will be, again, joining the full board to just kind of go over some of these numbers with all of us. Next, we reviewed, we had quite a few policies, which is a little different for BNF. So we did kind of review some policies. So just a couple policies. 6440 is our cooperative purchasing. This is more just wording changes. So we really just mirrored the Strauss-Esme recommendations on this particular policy. 6470 is the EFT and claimant policy. This is a new policy, and at this time, this is a recommendation. We are not looking to move this policy forward, but really what this policy does is it allows us to pay our bills electronically. It is a little complicated. It requires some reporting that would need to be kind of worked through. So Mrs. Sugars is going to take this policy to our auditors. We do think it could be helpful with our larger repeat vendors such as utilities or health benefits, but there's still a little bit that needs to be worked out with this policy, and I think we're going to be bringing this back to the board possibly in January. So again, this is not, we're not looking to move this policy forward. 7450 is property inventory. This is more definition changes, and it was then updated just again wording changes on that policy. The next one we reviewed was 7510, the use of school facilities. This is a new requirement in this policy where outside organizations that have youth programs, they have to actually now understand the district's safety and security plan. and they must be trained on our plan. So Mr. Saporito is going to provide the training to these outside groups, and we're going to add this language to our policy, both our policy and our regulation. And then the last one is policy 8561, the procurement procedures for our school nutrition program. So after kind of reviewing this policy, rather than just kind of continue to tweak our original policy and the wording, it really just made sense to take the stress SMA wording and just make that policy our own. So that is what we're going to be doing on policy 8561. So those were the policies that we kind of reviewed. And again, I just want to congratulate Mrs. Sugars and her team for the wonderful audit. And with that, we'll open it up to Mrs. Sugars if you have anything to add.
You did a great job, Mrs. Schultz.
Thank you. Any committee members? Anything else to add, or
Just, I would just like to echo congratulations to Ms. Sugars and her team. No small feat to come out of an audit the size of our audit, based on the size of our district, with no findings and no recommendations. That's amazing. You know, in my professional life, I'm in audit mode day in and day out in my job, and that's like unheard of. So congratulations, job well done, and fantastic news for our district for sure. So I just wanted to echo Mrs. Schultz's statement there.
So I would just like to congratulate the financial team as well. It was a fantastic finding. So good work there, team.
Mr. Vadio?
Yes, I want to join the other board members in the congratulations to Ms. Sugars and her team. I have two questions on the world of 7510 use of school property. The first one is, for Mr. Saporito's time, and I'm sure it's valuable. I mean, is there some piece of is that a piece of our negotiation then with outside use groups? And the other question is, so Camden County Educational Services Commission basically took this year off. They said, look, we're not gonna do any kind of outside school facility rental. Do we have a time frame that we're saying just no for outside school facility users, or is that just still a case by case? Is that sort of codified in policy for us?
At this point, we had discussed a date of February 1st before we would reevaluate whether or not we were going to allow outside users use our facilities. I expect that date will probably get extended. We'll have to see what it looks like, come February. And Ben, your first question was about the training.
Yeah, I just in our contracts, will they pay Mr. Saporito for his valuable consultation? Or we?
Well, I think that Mr. Saporito is happy to do it. It'll probably be a normal course of his duties that he does. I think also it'll be easy. We can train. We can train one person, and they can in turn train their group. So we don't have to meet with an entire group or something like that. So Tony and I have touched base briefly on what that will look like. There's no urgency, of course, at this point, but we'll be developing that training to make it as simple as possible.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Goodwin?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, so when that training is done, it won't in any way compromise the everyday kind of procedures. I know we try to keep those kind of close to hand. So if we're talking about training outside groups, we're not going to be training him in like, the things that we like to keep close to the vest kind of things, correct?
Absolutely not. The training will really be, when you think about when outside groups are using our buildings, it's typically after the school day. So the training will really focus on what their responsibilities will be in a building that is essentially, not a full building, not utilized to its full capacity. So kind of what we do during the daytime when we have students in here, and what happens after hours is a little bit different. They'll definitely be trained. It's more focusing on evacuations in the event of an emergency, those kinds of things. So no, we won't be we had had some conversation, about maybe making a video, that's not something we want to do. We don't want videos floating around about what our procedures are. So we will definitely be focusing on what our procedures are after hours, not necessarily what our procedures are during the course of the day.
I think that's all the questions.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Schultz. So I will share what I can from our HR committee meeting. As in most monthly meetings, some of the information discussed is confidential. We did meet on Tuesday, December 1st, and there are two items that I can share with you tonight. The first was a policy update with the first reading of policy P1620, which is administrative employment contracts. This was reviewed by the committee, and this policy is going through the December cycle. I believe a copy of it is in the agenda for you to review the revised language. Secondly, we discussed the resolution that is on the special action agenda tonight, authorizing the submission of 2 employment contracts to the county superintendent for review. These 2 positions, which are assistant superintendent pre-K curriculum and assistant superintendent compliance, equity, and student services, were reviewed and discussed previously by the HR committee in both October and November, as well as by the full board in October. In addition, the job descriptions supporting those 2 positions were revised and approved during the November agenda cycle. In addition, a job description for Director of Special Education was revised and approved in the November agenda cycle, and that position will be posted once the contracts for the 2 positions I previously mentioned are approved by the county superintendent. And that is all I can share this evening, and our next HR committee meeting is tentatively scheduled for Tuesday, January 5th. Mrs. Schultz, I know there's not usually much to add there, but anything to add?
I do not.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from board members? Mr. Avadia.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Seidel. I'm just chock full of questions today. Can I ask that this committee take a look at something I heard about at NJSBA workshop? It's called, I don't know what it's called, but it's something around an alternative path to teaching.
Say that again, Mr. Avadia. I didn't catch what the name of it was.
It's like an alternative path to teaching. And there are folks called per diem professionals. So they're coming in for the day to, let's say, teach in the district. But it turns out that if we approach them and make it easier for them to become teachers, there's a lot to be gained. It specifically came up in my, in kind of thinking about like, equity and diversity in teaching staff. And I don't know what it looks like for us. I'm sure it's robust, but I'd love to kind of hear more about that, because for this NJSBA workshop session, this seemed like a silver bullet that doesn't often get the attention. So I just, for me, I feel like it would belong in HR. I don't know anything as normal about any of this, but I'd love to just hear more from kind of the district on that line of thinking.
I'm going to turn it over to Miss Adrian to see if she has anything to comment about that. I know, just in my years on the board, we have talked in the past about an alternative path to teaching and how that plays into sort of what you were asking. I'm gonna ask Miss Adrian to either jump in or we can talk about it at the next meeting.
Yes, there is an alternative path. It's an alternate route path for people that did not go to school specifically to be teachers, so they get a certificate of eligibility. It's a little bit more restrictive than somebody who's student taught. The mentor hours are longer. Their ability to get the standard certificate takes a little bit longer, and they have to do some additional training before the certificate is issued. It's not exactly been what I'm hearing you say, so I've taken some notes and I'm gonna look into it.
Thank you, Ms. Adrian, and thank you, Mr. Avadia, for bringing it to our attention. Ms. Friedel?
I believe this is the appropriate time for me to just make my fellow board members aware that when it is time to vote on, what item is it? The contracts going to the county office for approval, I will be abstaining from that vote just to not have a perception of any conflicts of interest.
Thank you, Ms. Friedel. I appreciate you sharing the reasoning with the rest of the board. Thank you. Any other hands? Okay, I am going to turn it over, actually back to you, Ms. Friedel, to share the committee update from Policy and Legislation Committee meeting, please.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Seidel. So on November 30th at 6 p.m., Policy and Legislation met to review what is happening. So there were no new legislation that was covered, but Dr. Malash did share that there are quite a few items pending, and I think Mrs. Matlack actually covered a few of them in her correspondence. But just really quickly, a few of the pending legislations, and Dr. Malash, if you know if there's been any movement, please share. But there was a assembly bill talking about racial discrimination and social justice in the middle school level. That another Senate bill was looking at making a requirement for school district websites to be accessible to persons with disabilities, which we think is already a federal requirement. And I believe our district does already meet that requirement. So if it does become a New Jersey piece of legislation, we're already there. Another bill is about electronic cigarette usage being taught in health and PE classes. One of the bills which Ms. Matlack discussed was the postponing of QSAC for certain school districts, which you gave some detail on. There was also legislation which is expected to be passed, which will extend the completion date to file the audit. And a lot of that is coming from the fact that the state is not able to release in a timely fashion their piece of the information, which would really make it impossible for school districts to complete their audits. Another bill was introduced to use the funds from the cannabis that was passed, the cannabis money, to fund community learning, which is after school programs in certain communities, which I believe are really up in the Essex County area, not targeted throughout the state. There was another piece of legislation about waiving athletic physicals, but that already had been extended for 6 months. So we're not sure how that one is going to land. And school districts are waiting on guidelines related to the Bridge Year program, which was passed to allow juniors and seniors to, I guess, basically continue their high school education as a result of all the remote and hybrid instruction. We had a conversation about open enrollment. We looked at enrollment data at all of our schools. We had a conversation about the attendance areas. And one of the things we wanted to talk to with the board is, as a board, do we want to look at our attendance areas, potentially redrawing lines? It is about a year-long process to do this, but the question before the board is this something that we want to take a look at, looking at enrollment, looking at attendance areas to determine if we should redraw lines? We did discuss briefly the eligibility of resident and non-residents, or we will be looking at that policy. And I think that is my summary. Dr. Malash or members of the committee, if I missed anything in my notes, please elaborate.
I think, Ms. Friday, you covered it. We had a lot that we listed in the agenda. I think you went through and covered each of those. I'm not aware of any substantive movement on the proposed legislation that we discussed. We are still waiting to see whether and Mrs. Matt and I talked about this from her piece about the CUSAC legislation, about whether that will be finalized and ultimately be signed. Let's see. I think that is it. We did talk about, the committee discussed remote learning instruction and hybrid learning instruction and the use of cameras and what that will look like, which subsequently I included in my postcard and the letter out to the community last Friday, just making sure the community is aware that students do not have to have their cameras on for class, that we encourage them. They do not have to have their cameras on for class. So that kind of grew out of our discussion as well.
Thank you, Dr. Malash. Eric, did you have anything to add?
I think you did a great job, and Dr. Malash did send out that letter. Hopefully that helps. I thought it was a good start. I just really wanted to. I just want to make sure that the parents and folks know that if they don't, for whatever reason, don't want to use a camera or doesn't feel comfortable on a microphone, that's something that is not part of their grade or part of their evaluation. So I think that was good. And I think you did a great job covering all the other items as well.
Thank you. Mr. Abadia?
Yeah, Ms. Friedel, so that's a great readout. Yeah, just to echo what you're talking about, we're going to have to look at what students go where. We don't have to do it in P&L. I think that's where it belongs, but we're going to have that discussion. We've talked about talking about Rosa, but it's just a bigger discussion. I think if we had the map called up that we looked at P&L, it would be obvious that there's just a lot of gerrymandering. Right? It's not, people think, oh, we have neighborhood schools in Cherry Hill, and the map just does not prove that out. So you have, it's something I really support looking at as a full board. I think it's a conversation that has to happen. We've got to figure out if we're going to go to an 11, 12, 9, 10, 11, 12 model at high school. We got to figure out if we can have a magnet school, if that makes sense in our ecosystem. We got to figure out if it makes sense that it looks like a gerrymandered map for elementary schools. And I think, when we think about efficiencies and equity around the district and these types of questions, we can't ignore that. So I think, if we were to tee that up for January, whenever, it's something we should talk about soon. So I really do support that with you.
Thank you. Ms. Neary?
Yeah, I would say I would agree. We have to look at that if we look at the demographic study, and even based on just what Bob Garrison had shared earlier, I think we need to know what the max capacity is for our buildings as to how many students, because we definitely have, some buildings significantly more students than others, which doesn't seem sustainable for any length of time. So I think we kind of have to overlay that and then, have some hard discussions, as Ben said, as P&L, but part of strategic planning, and then with the community. I don't think you can put it off any longer, because there's probably only one building that's, a neighborhood school. And it's only because I think you can't get to it all that well with a bus. But I agree. I think we just have to go ahead and look at it now.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Neary. That was actually part of our conversation. And there is only one school that is truly a neighborhood school. The rest of our schools are in neighborhoods. Any other questions or comments?
Ms. Friedel, I don't know if you could see my hand. I know
Oh,
you're
I
kind of far away in the
can't.
picture.
You're very far away.
I know. Thank you. I'm so excited to hear that that conversation has started on attendance areas and potentially redrawing lines. It's one that I know I'm pretty passionate about, and a conversation I think that we've needed to have for a long time. And now that all of the, you know, the chips are in the right place to have that conversation, I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. And I think that, you know, a big part of that conversation has to be about the middle schools and what our magnet school looks like, as Mr. Avadia alluded to. And, you know, as Mrs. Neary mentioned, unfortunately, some of these conversations are just, you know, there are going to be some difficult conversations, but as board, that's part of our role, right? To have those difficult conversations you know, put it all out there and have those discussions. So I'm really excited to hear that the board will be pursuing that topic in the near future. So thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have
Mr. Goodwin and then Ms. Matlack?
Yeah, on that front, one of the things I did want to throw out as well is that as we look at that, I think we really should make sure we're also working with the township, because I mean, some of the work that just recently took place on Crescent Road, I thought was really good in terms of in certain sections, they're building sidewalks and things like that. So if we want to really have a neighborhood schools, we're definitely going to have schools where you can walk there. And I'm just thinking of Rosa as for instance, if we can work with the township in terms of building sidewalks and making it a non-hazardous route, I think that would really assist in whatever path we want to go as far as neighborhood, or does it have to be a commuter school? Because currently I don't think there's any, I think everyone's assigned to a bus to go to Rosa at this point in time. So that might be another conversation we want to definitely consider as we look at those various options, and working with the township to look at what can be done in terms of the routes there.
Great suggestion, Mr. Goodwin. Mrs. Matlack?
Thank you. Yeah, we touched on this just a little bit in strategic planning last week. You know, so that there's that overlap with the work that each of the committees is doing, and as it has been said by you and Mrs. Neary, you know, and I believe that, you know, others even haven't vocalized it but are thinking the same thing. It is a difficult conversation we need to have, but we need to have it. And when you take a look at those, at the map that Mr. Ovadia mentioned, you can see how much the perceived neighborhood schools are really just in neighborhoods. That was a good way to put it. You know, they are in neighborhoods, and the original intent, you know, back in the 60s and 70s was that they were neighborhood schools, and they were back then. We're not back then anymore. And they don't serve us like that right now. So we need to take a hard look at how they do serve us and how we need them to serve us in the future, and go from there.
Right.
Thank you.
And always within lens of equity and
Absolutely.
the needs of the students. So thank you so very much.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in, that's an excellent point that we should definitely consider, because you don't want a school where the only buses that come in are maybe students for special education or something like that, because that kind of, you know, that kind of stands out. So I think just really looking at it from a holistic standpoint and viewpoint, and really making sure we're in conversation with the community as well is going to be important.
So if there's no more questions, Ms. Seidel, I am finished with my report.
Thank you, Ms. Friedel. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Avadia to discuss the strategic planning meeting.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Seidel. So the first half of our meeting on December 1st was just teeing up and giving some examples and giving just some encouragement to Mr. Garrison as becoming an award-winning presenter as he was tonight. And he did a great job with that. Although I do want to thank the board for pushing back on us the first time and just saying, let's do 3 schools and let's look at all levels, because that's not where we started, and that was very valuable, I think, tonight. Then the second half of our meeting, as sort of promised previously, we were going to talk about school configuration. And I think we did a nice job to kind of lay out some of the parts and pieces. So let me go through what some of those were. We talked about student enrollment, school configuration generally. P&L had asked us to look at how special education specifically could be delivered in terms of offerings, clustering, self-contained programs, in terms of like, what are the structural pieces that would make us, able to tackle this maybe differently. We got to talking about the alternative high school program and ways where expanding that program could really be beneficial. We talked about open enrollment and that history in the high schools. We did talk about the demographic study from Dr. Grip and what that had suggested to us. We talked about really firming up some of that data to figure out kind of where are we? We did talk about the concept of evening up elementary schools. One elementary school principal, let's say, has 270 kids, one has 500. I don't know if those are the right numbers, but there is a disparity between. So we talked about, is that how we look at it? Do we look at it through other equity lenses? What is this neighborhood community-based school? Is Kingston the only example? Are these all neighborhood schools? We just don't understand them. How do we sort of conceptualize that? And what it means, not just on a map, but emotionally, right, for our community and these pieces. We talked about Rosa and IB. We talked about, at one point West had IB as well. That was discontinued after 2009. Rosa remains in that IP funnel. And we talked about career and technical education programs, how they've come out of the high schools and how that may not be a beneficial path forward. That may be something to be looked at. And then Bob was fairly eloquent tonight about it, but we did talk about spaces, right? What are the spaces that we could, well, so first of all, we want flexibility. Because our buildings are built many, many years ago, they really reflect the mores of that time. But if we look, for example, and just as an example, but at High School East and the F-Wing, could that be something through grant dollars where we could have something akin to what Bob mentioned tonight, but specifically a STEAM lab that he's put into Delran High School, woodshop makerspace with the hundreds of thousands of dollars of grant funding that they've been able to do. Vocational type of stuff, hospitality, culinary arts program that he mentioned in Pennsauken, an advanced manufacturing tech computer program at GCIT, a nursing allied medical health program in Cumberland. These had a lot of emotional resonance, in the communities they were built in. Knowing Bob, they probably had some bond and some great narrative around kind of the future of education in those communities. And so kind of looking at some of those things for us. We didn't necessarily get far in the discussion, but we didn't necessarily think that in a first meeting we would. For us as a committee, we have in March on our docket to talk about 21st century learning. So that's the next logical place for us to really delve back into these questions: technical education, special spaces and programs that could be things that the district would be known for, IB curriculum or other curricula. But anyway, so the question as we look at it from strategic planning isn't about doing CNI's job, because CNI does a great job. Our question is, how do the spaces and how do the grants and how does the emotional resonance of some of these things really fit into the future vision for this district as seen by us, by the community, of course, by administration. So more to come. For next month as a committee, as I said, we're tackling quite a bit, but the things that are going to be new that I haven't mentioned before is security. So Mrs. Tong makes reference to that tonight through some of the questioning with with Garrison. Security is it's going to come up in P&L as well, but it's something that we've got to tackle as strategic planning. So that's going to be a big piece of this. And then the other piece is how to engage community. It's funny, my notes are how to engage the community in the bond process, but it's really a bigger question than that, right? It's a question of how do we engage the community intentionally, regularly. I love listening to public comment. I think it's an essential piece of what we do here, but there's an engagement piece that we really have to delve into with strategic planning. Much like Bob talked about, Mr. Garrison today, I mean, we're not doing this at people. We're not doing this, just for people. We're doing it also with people. And I guess for the second half of our discussion, strategic planning, the emotional resonance of all this really was a big topic. It's sometimes hard to remember. Yeah, it's $300 million, but it's to educate kids. We're not building widgets. We're not. It's not a prison. We're doing a certain thing here, and so with the buildings, we need to keep that in mind. But with these topics that I just mentioned, it's even more important. And so it's really going to be a continued discussion on all these fronts. A lot to do. And so, yeah, I felt good about the meeting, and I turn it to other board members. Anything I've missed or anything you wanted to mention? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Friedel.
Ms. Friedel had her hand up. Mr. Ladia.
This is more of a comment, but I really would like to have some more conversations around, success is not always measured by going to college. Students can be successful with other opportunities. And, back in the day, I'll admit there was wood shop when I went to Cherry Hill West. I couldn't identify anything I made out of wood, but there were opportunities. I know some schools, for example, have auto shop, just different opportunities. So our students, no matter what their future trajectory is, they're leaving the doors with skills, whether it be go to college or to pursue careers. And I know we do some of that. We have the nursing program at West and ROTC and different things. But I do think it's a good conversation to have as we are, looking at our future for all of our students. So thank you for having that discussion.
Okay, and then administration, other things to think. Oh, Mrs. Tom.
Sally, you're on mute. If you're talking, we can't hear you.
All right. This may be out of the question, but if it is, just let me know. I'm just came up with this thing about the structure and foundation of our buildings. You could answer later. You don't have to answer now. Are there problems in the school buildings concerning the foundation and structure of the school building? We could ask Mr. Garrison on that.
So are you asking, so Mrs. Tong, are you asking about the current buildings like as they sit today?
Yes. That he
So
went to all
for me, that would
the
be,
building.
for me, that would be BNF.
Okay.
Correct me if Mrs. Sugars, you sit on both. Is that, are we thinking about that the right way or?
Well, we're certainly looking at what type of projects we need to think about as we work with the budget upcoming next year. What are priorities? What are things that need to be addressed sooner rather than later as we plan for those types of projects? Mrs. Tong, if you have a particular concern, if you could email that to me, I can certainly look into it.
Oh, just a general, I think, in general. But I will send you an email just for general, and then you can respond to that. Then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and then administration. So, lively discussion. We really leaned on you, and I think there's a lot of good stuff. Yeah, just what do you think in terms of where we're headed?
I thought our discussions were great. Again, as I said earlier, after Bob's presentation, we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of things to discuss in a short amount of time. And I think that we have a nicely outlined schedule to do that. I think you're right too, Ben. Our meetings probably could be 3-4 hours long. Conversations are always very interesting, but I think that there's a lot of things that we learned anything from the last bond referendum. There's a lot of questions that we have to do a better job of communicating the answers to before we move ahead with the next step. And I think that's what we're doing right now. We're trying to explore all of these different things to make sure that as we're going into the next planning process, we can say, yes, we looked at that. Yes, we talked about that. Yes, we explored that. So I think we're, it seems like it's a lot of work that has to be done, but I think we're just moving through it and tackling it. A lot of the conversations we're having will shape how we move forward, not only with the bond referendum, but with budget and other things as well. So they're very important conversations to have.
I would agree. I think great conversation we had last week, continuing probably a couple of hours worth of conversation this evening. I think it's incredibly valuable when the full board is engaged in the discussion. And as Mrs. Sugars talked about, as we've gone through, how it goes from the board to the community, the board's voice, the board ownership in the direction that we are taking, that oversight role that this is a primary focus and ability of the Board of Education. And I think it's so incredibly important that we do hear the voice of the individual board members, in discussion, and that the board has a position as the board moves forward. There's got to be ownership in what's taking place. One of Bob's pieces every time that he presents, and anybody that comes in and looks at our buildings, is they start with how old the buildings are, when the last time significant work was done in the buildings. And it's generational at this point as we take a look at it. But I have incredible optimism for where we are going. Ben, you referred to, and we can certainly share back out with the board, the full board again, about the demographic study and what the sending areas look like. Those are some very dynamic conversations, about what does an elementary school, who attends that, what does a middle school look like, who attends the middle school, what's the high school look like, who attends the high school, and how are those determinations made. As Mr. Sugars referred to, and as this future planning team put together, there is a calendar for how we expect to progress throughout the course of this year. If we have goals, and I think that's something the board needs to hold itself to in these discussions, is the identification of timeframe goals and meeting them. And I'll refer back to Maureen Rushi, who's our superintendent and a wonderful human being. One of her favorite lines all the time is, in education we can spend too much time admiring a problem, and we can't allow ourselves to do that. We can't just talk about it. We can't just admire it and say, yes, it's a problem. I'm encouraged by the board and the enthusiasm for moving forward.
Yeah, I would want to say, we'll get to Mrs. Tong as well, but I appreciate, Dr. Malash and Mrs. Sugars, your leadership in keeping us to it. It's not easy to cover this much of stuff, but we have to do it. I think often should we have 2 strategic planning meetings a month, but I'm not going to do that today. Mrs. Tong, what were you going to say? I think you're on mute if you're speaking.
Oh, no, stop the video.
Yeah,
okay. I was just thinking right now about we should look into the future. What should be the future school classroom looks like when we do the new buildings, either renovation or new buildings? Because that's what is going to happen. We're no longer in 1950 or 1960s. We're in 2020. So if we're going to do something, all that money we put in, we should look into the future. How the classroom should look and how the students, how they sit in, and how is the classroom teaching method is going to be. That should be all integrated to the new construction renovation.
I know, so Mrs. Tong, totally agree with you. I know it's got to be baked into our March discussion topic on the 21st century side. I guess, so to Mrs. Sugars and to Dr. Malash, who could we invite in that has like that pulse on, what that looks like, I guess we talked about at the last committee meeting, if these were built in the 60s, wood shop was very prominent. today computer design might be, and that might look differently. But is there, well, just something to think about, I guess, is there something we could tap from higher ed or something like that might do something of interest? I don't know, but Mrs. Tong, I hear what you're saying. I mean, we're planning for the future. This is a generational investment we're talking about now.
Right, and we should reach out to the township and the funding, the grant writers and all that as much as we can from whatever source we have. We should need to talk more regarding how the funding going to come from besides just the bond.
Ben, I'm sorry, Ben, we can absolutely, have some people come out and spend time with us. I think that there's perspective of folks that we have in the district, whether it's like somebody that Dr. Mahan referred to, Mrs. Esposito, who's our technology coach, some classroom teachers who are doing incredible things. We can use examples of how, transformation took place with, refurbishment of that building and a change just in the furniture that we purchased that's being used. I think there's a pragmatic realism that goes into the discussion as well. We're not going to find anybody that's going to say in 10 years from now, this is what classrooms are going to look like. If they are, they're absolutely a salesperson trying to get us to buy something. But I think what we talk about how we are using those spaces, and this also ties directly into the conversation that we're going to have about renovation of space and what does it mean to renovate space. What's the flexibility of space that can be used? What tools of communication and acquisition of information? I think I'll tell you, one of the greatest groups of folks to involve in these discussions are the librarians and media specialists. Talk about people that are connected and have their fingers that goes back and forth between what goes on in a community, at a collegiate level, elementary, middle, and high school. But I think librarians are people that absolutely have to be involved in those discussions about what will it look like and what is it that we are doing. As much as education changes, there is still a reality of what education looks like and what the value is, right? Most important thing in instruction is the connection between the teacher and that child. And it doesn't matter if you go back to Aristotle or to Plato, the connection between the teacher and the students is the same importance that it is today. We may have lots of shiny things. We may do it through distance as we're looking at a computer screen. We might have a blackboard or a dry erase board, and different rooms can look different. But it's about the involvement and the connection between the teacher and the child. So the other piece and not to add additional things, because this is where it starts to branch out then into the other committees, but through curriculum and instruction and professional development, right? What program are we committed to as a school district to continue to provide professional development for our staff? What are we going to continue to access for them to make sure that they have the opportunity to train, to practice, and then make sure that it's implementable in the classroom?
Yeah, so Mr. Amati, I was going to, I see she went on video, but I was going to ask Mrs. Tong for some clarification because I thought I did hear Mr. Garrison sort of start to address both of those topics in, bringing our buildings up to this century in our classroom. So I know that, my perspective of his presentation tonight was that that's top of mind for Garrison. I also heard him talk about, assisting us with additional funding sources and looking for opportunities where we can get some of the money back in our district's pocket. So, definitely more conversation to be had, but I was pleasantly surprised that to hear that those things are already top of mind, it appears, with Mr. Garrison and his team. And I think Mrs. Schultz had something here. I don't know if you can see our hands there, so.
Yeah, I think that I was gonna ask Ben to maybe go back and clarify, but it was my understanding, I thought I had heard Mr. Garrison also say that ERI and Garrison Architect were already working with the township for one avenue, and that there was a division of his firm that they had the responsibility to work with the state to secure funding. I believe I had heard that this morning, and then I believe he also had mentioned that he'd gone through the HVAC and had specifically commented that the HVAC units were all going to be brought up to 21st century standards. So I just was wanting to make sure I had gotten the same perception. And then I know this is going back, but I think Ken, you were on the interview committee with me. So, and I think Ben, you were too, but I can go back to my notes. But I also thought when we interviewed Garrison that they also mentioned that they also do, was it, because we had 3 firms, but was it their firm that also did STEM work? That they also had a division of their firm that specialized in STEM work? I mean, I can go back and check my notes, but if so, we might want to talk to them and find out if their division that does STEM work. I just can't remember. I don't know if you, Ben or Kim or Lynn, like, was it that firm that had like a STEM division that could help us with like that? Because I also was thinking Pushable would help us with like the
I don't
design.
recall if they had a separate. I mean,
Or was
I'm not
that
a
might have been LAN?
Yeah, I believe that was the other one.
That might have been LAN Associates. So
Yeah.
that's going back.
Kim was not on the interview.
No,
Oh, I'm
I
sorry,
wasn't
Pam.
on that one.
Oh, that was you,
But-
Lori. Like, I don't know. I'm sorry. It was, yeah. So I think it might have been LAN that had the help with STEM. So new point, but I just
No.
wanted, I'm with Lori. I just wanted to, or pardon, with Lisa. That's what I heard from tonight. So I just wanted to see if I heard that correctly.
I think there's a couple things. So I think when it comes to like that energy audit and what we can get through that, I think that's through the state and not the township per se. But I think that's an area of expertise. Rod grants, I think he says aren't coming back. So I think there's a board discussion to be had around alternative funding. Now, is Garrison part of that solution? For sure. For me though, I guess, I don't know. For me, I think it's a BNF discussion. Now we'll loan you Bob because Bob is a precious resource. But I think, yeah, I mean, we have to sort of overturn all the rocks. I think today, I mean, he's great. And I think he was telling us a couple things he could do. I think he gets excited by those grants around like maker spaces but I think he was also trying to set some expectations. There's stuff that he it seems to me he doesn't do, where we'd have to talk to some other folks. But I think it's a bigger discussion. It's a valuable one to have for sure. I don't know. You know, I'd look to Lisa, to Ruth, or to Mrs. Seidel, Ms. Schultz. I don't know. Let's figure out how to kind of bring it forward. But I think it's a good discussion to have, and Bob certainly could be part of that solution, I think.
Thank you.
Lori, did you have, or Mrs. Neary, did you have a question, comment?
Oh, no, I was just going to reiterate around the programming. So to Sally's point, we're talking about the future state of the buildings. It's what is the innovative programming, because these classrooms are designed from the manufacturing model of 100 plus years ago, right? Even though they were built in the 50s and 60s. And that's not how education is happening, and that's not how it is moving forward. And what are they doing elsewhere, but not just within our immediate borders, but internationally, right? How are they structuring things? How are they moving forward? How are these kids going into their future, right? Not just, okay, you have high school or you have vocational school, and why is it one or the other? That is where we need the educational leadership, right? So that we can figure out what that should be for these kids, since that model from the late 80s and early 90s of everybody is college prep and everybody is moving forward, it's not less than, it's equal. Like, what are those paths? So that I think is key, because we can do whatever to the buildings, right? You take it down to the 4 basic walls of the structure, but you know, the programming, where is that going, and what does that space look like beyond just, you know, robotics labs and so on? Are there other program spaces that we should be thinking about for our kids? Because it's the one thing that was said at NJSBA since day one was we are preparing them for their future, not our pasts. So that's important. I think that is a really key thing that we should get to sooner rather than later, because how do you design the building and renovate it if you don't know what you're doing in it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I think, so somebody's got to take up at the board the discussion about, you know, there are only so many places our children are going. As Ms. Friedel says, you know, some of them are going to technical, some of them are going to military, some are going to college, and some have other pathways. We should look at all of those, you know, from an equity lens, from a what are our offerings lens. I mean, you know, I don't know. I don't know if that's CNI. I don't know if that's strategic planning. But yeah, somebody really, yeah, I think we have alignment kind of in looking at that direction. And, you know, I agree. We're preparing kids for their future, not our past. you know, I think there's a model where it says, you know, prom's the most important day of your life, but I think that was in the 80s. And I just don't think kids are like that today, but I don't know, who knows? I don't know generally in this space anything. So let's have a good conversation. It didn't come up though at the last strategic planning meeting. So I think we got to kind of wrap it up.
Mr. Abadi, I think that the one thing that I would say, just sort of on the tail end of that conversation, is I think that we're in a really great spot since our 3 overarching goals that we've sort of set for ourselves for the future and the next few years sort of hit on all of those things that were just brought up in the last, 5 to 10 minutes of this conversation. So the great news is that, the board, administration, all sort of realizes the value in all that and has already made that a priority. But by creating and approving and adopting those 3 overarching goals that basically hit on all of those things. So, we've done a lot of the hard work, and now it's just, making those things a reality.
Yeah, I agree. Great. I think it's very well put.
Okay, any other strategic planning questions? Mrs. Tong?
Yeah, you're on mute. You're on mute, Mrs. Tong.
I just want to compliment everybody and putting everybody together, getting all the data, and Ben put all these information together for us and put, I guess, keep us in line, or keep me in line. What should we be doing step by step, month to month, with Mrs. Sugar and Dr. Malaj and all of us. So with that, I say thank you to all of you. Let's work together.
Thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, Mrs. Seidel.
Okay, so that brings us into our special action agenda, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Matlack to please move C&I.
Certainly, thank you. Superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number 1, approval of special education settlement agreement. There's only one agenda item. Do I have a second, please? Mr. Goodwin, are there any questions or comments on that? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Okay, board members, I have opened up the online voting. You can cast your votes. We have all yes votes. Ms. Tong is abstaining.
Okay. Next, Mrs. Schultz, can you please move B and F?
The superintendent recommends, and I'll move the following. Number 1, approval of bill list. Number 2, resolution authorizing competitive contracting for technology monitoring services. Number 3, transfer of current year surplus to reserve. Number 4, resolution approving an extension for extraordinary unspecifiable services contract with Kroll for technology monitoring services. Do I have a second? Mrs. Seidel. Are there any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Okay. Once again, I am opening up the online voting for board members.
Mrs. Sugars, I need to abstain to Henry Shine and Fayada Home Health on the bill list, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other than Mrs. Schultz's abstention, we have a unanimous vote.
Thank you. I'm going to move human resources. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Item 1, termination of employment certificated. Item 2, termination of employment non-certificated. Item 3, appointments certificated. Item 4, appointments non-certificated. Item 5, assignment salary change non-certificated. Item 6, other motions. Can I have a second? Mrs. Schultz? Any questions?
I do. I'm not sure how I can do this, but help me out if I'm not allowed to. Hold on, let me put my camera. Action. Okay. Let me know if I allowed to. I'd like to motion on number 19.6 of the motions. I like to motion to defer the vote to another meeting, another day.
Okay, do you need to ask for a second?
Oh, do I have a second?
The motion hasn't been seconded. So, Mr. Green, just as a point of order, so the motion doesn't move forward, correct?
That is correct, Madam President.
Okay. Okay, any other questions? Mr. Goodwin?
This is more a question for Dr. Malash. Can you just reiterate to the board I know we've voted on it before, but just reiterate to the board around other motions and just talk to us the structure and the plan of moving forward with this motion, please.
Sure. So the process, well, first I'll tell you about the process and I'll tell you what ultimately the outcome will be. With positions in New Jersey in public schools, assistant superintendent positions, the board has to act to send the contract to be reviewed by the executive county superintendent. The executive county superintendent has to review the contracts. Once the executive county superintendent approves and notifies the district, the board then must act to make the appointment. So it's a two-step process to go through. In Cherry Hill, we have gone back and forth over the course or during the course of the last 20 years from having up to one deputy superintendent, 4 assistant superintendents, directors of curriculum, and directors of special education. Those positions have changed during the course of the last 20 years. In the current configuration, there are 2 assistant superintendents. There's assistant superintendent for business / board secretary, and there's an assistant superintendent on the instructional side, pre-K to 12. There is also a director of curriculum and a director of pupil services. As we talked about in October, and then we talked about in November with the addition of the new job descriptions, we're going to do 2 things with these positions. One is we're taking the director of curriculum position and combining it with an assistant superintendent position. So there will be 2 assistant superintendents on the instructional side, one that will focus on pre-K to 5, one that will focus on 6 through 12. Both of those assistant superintendents will have responsibility for curriculum and assessment. Last spring, the board approved the job description and the creation of the director of equity and compliance. When we look at the changes that have gone on since the position was created last spring and currently in the needs of the district, made the determination to take that director of equity and compliance position that was approved, although not filled, and create a 3rd assistant superintendent position, an assistant superintendent for equity, compliance, and student services. That takes what's currently the director of pupil services position, does away with the director of pupil services, and then we'll recreate the director of special education. That way we'll have somebody that will oversee equity, compliance, and all of student services. And then there will be a director level position that will focus specifically on special education. It's been more than a decade since we've had a director of special education in Cherry Hill. That we just were unable for a number of years to fill the position, and then the position was recreated around 2012 as director of pupil services. So this provides a number of different things. It provides additional oversight with the schools. It provides additional oversight and direction with special education, provides additional people for discussion, to follow up with parents, to follow up with families, to follow up with staff. As the board may recall, Dr. Smith, who had been our assistant superintendent for about a year and a half, a year and 7 months, he left in July to become the superintendent in the Evesham School District. We posted and did an initial 1st round interview for the assistant superintendent position. The committee that met, which also involved a board member, who sat in an observational role, The committee was made up of district level administrators, collective bargaining group leadership. It was very clear based on the candidate pool that we received that it was probably too much job for one person to be the assistant superintendent, pre-K to 12, to supervise the 19 schools and assume the other responsibilities that had been there. So it came from that, followed up the discussion in September with the change in the job descriptions, the discussions we had with the board in October, the introduction of the new job descriptions in November, and then the appointment of these two positions. Dr. Mahan and Mrs. Wethington have been employed by the district and incredibly successful in their positions. Yes, there are people that have had concerns. There's people that have concerns with me, with Mrs. Sugars, with every one of the board members, with most of our principals, with teachers. That happens. There is no question about that. In our roles and in what we do, it's our responsibility to maintain the fidelity of the instructional program that exists within the school district to meet the individual needs of the students, and to do that in a fiscally responsible way that also meets the state compliance that we have to follow. There are state compliance guidelines, especially in the realm of special education, especially in what we do with student services. And I can tell you just a couple of highlights. As Dr. Mahan is an earned doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania. She has an undergrad and graduate degree from Monmouth. As she has been the director of curriculum after serving for a number of years as the principal at Clara Barton. We have expanded the role of the curriculum office. We've expanded professional development. We have moved the department of technology now falls under the director underneath that office to combine technology with curriculum and with instruction. We've had, as she mentioned, Dr. Mahan, other administrators, the curriculum team, teachers have presented at local, statewide, and national conferences. We've had a number of them that have been published and have published works both nationally and internationally based on the work that's going on with the school districts. We've revised quite a bit of new curriculum. Dr. Mahan, if you recall, was also the chair of the full-day curriculum committee, which the board often refers to as a model for how we have done committees and how we've introduced new curricula. Dr. Mahan oversaw the introduction of Chinese as a new world language in the district, the hiring of staff, the development of curriculum. Mrs. Wethington, in her position as the Director of Pupil Services, her position oversees special education, student services, counseling, nursing. Basically, we usually talk about everything that deals with students that's not on the instructional side to come through. During the time that she has been here, has been instrumental in incredibly diversifying the child study team staff that we have within the district, has been involved in the addition of additional school counselors. If you recall, 6 years ago, we did not have school counselors at all of our schools. That falls under her purview. We've added an additional nursing position, changed the structure of what the nurses are involved with and what they do. That comes, again, with what she does. The addition of a pupil services supervisor, specifically that focuses on INRS, focuses on 504, and again, involved in the changes in legislation, the changes in the law. In her background, Mrs. Wethington is a social worker by training, beginning her career in Perth Amboy. She worked for the Department of Ed. Mrs. Wethington, during her time at the Department of Education, was actually involved in the drafting in the original guidance for the Amistad curriculum that took place. She was also instrumental in taking the grant money, the seed money that came through to develop the college, the HBCU college program for students that's run throughout the state each year. Well under her purview, she worked for JJC before coming to Cherry Hill. The background that the ladies have is incredibly diverse, incredibly well represented in terms of successes the school district has had. Because of the role positions that they are in, often behind the scenes, we're often the person at that end that has the ultimate responsibility to say no and to provide next steps in what's going to take place. So that's the process, and the process in looking at what we're doing to restructure, to provide better support for our schools, more regular and better direct contact with families, with teachers, with administrators, helps to provide the oversight and the guidance that we talk so much about at the Board of Education level.
Thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Friedel?
I'm just a little confused. I mean, I'm not part of the vote, but I'm confused because what I just heard on the positions was, at one point, Dr. Malash, you said that it was apparent that the K-12 was too large and to have a pre-K 5, 6, 12, but the contract is for pre-K through 12 curriculum. So is your vision to still separate that into 2 positions, or you're going back to 1 position for the entire pre-K through 12?
Now, Mrs. Friedel, if you refer to the organizational chart that we had gone over last month and I sent out to the board again today, there are 2 positions. The job description is assistant superintendent pre-K to 12 and curriculum. The assignment of those 2 positions, one of those individuals will be assigned to supervise pre-K to 5. One of those individuals will be assigned to supervise 6 through 12. So one of those assistant superintendents will supervise the Barkley School and the 12 elementary schools. The other assistant superintendent will supervise the 3 middle schools, the 2 comprehensive high schools, and the principal at the alternative high school.
Okay, so it's late. So you are looking to have 2 assistant superintendents in addition, and then the equity.
Yes.
Okay, that just wanted that point clarified. Thank you.
Yes. There's only 1 position. We will go back after these positions are filled, then we will reconvene the interviews that began in the fall for the other assistant superintendent position.
Thank you, because that was a little confusing to me. I don't know if it was to anyone else, but it was confusing to me.
Okay, Mrs. Sugars.
All right, I'm going to open this up for voting. I know that there are going to be some abstentions on 19.6. So I'm going to read through the list now. Ms. Friedel?
I vote yes to 1 through 5, and I abstain from 6.
Okay, Mr. Goodwin?
I vote yes for all.
Mrs. Matlack?
I vote yes for all.
Mrs. Neary?
Yes to 1 through 5, and I must abstain from 19.6.
Mr. Avadia?
Yes to all.
Mrs. Schultz?
Yes to all.
Mrs. Tom?
I say everything is yes, it says 19.6.
Are you abstaining or voting no?
Oh, I say no to 19.6, everything else is yes.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Seidel?
Yes to all.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Ms. Seidel, can I just talk about, I know on, or at least I saw earlier in the attendees, approval tonight was just provided for Mrs. Lauren Giordano as the new principal at the alternative high school. As we have talked about a number of times, we all know that Dr. Chapman is retiring at the end of December. This is Weddington led the search to hire a new principal for the alternative high school. The alternative high school program in Cherry Hill has its history back to 1980 when it's existed. This is the first time that there has been a posting and a hiring where somebody specifically with a special education background has been hired for the alternative high school. Mrs. Giordano is coming back to Cherry Hill. Mrs. Giordano, not only did she grow up in Cherry Hill and graduate from High School West, but previously she taught at Cherry Hill High School West and at Kingston Elementary School. For the last couple of years, she has been the Director of Special Services in the Clementon School District, also here in Camden County. We are very excited to have her return. She has a bachelor's degree from Rutgers. She has her special ed endorsement is also from Rutgers, and a master's in educational leadership from the American College of Education. I am incredibly excited to see Lauren return to the alternative high school and to see the impact that she will have on that program. Again, such a specialized program. Like I said, we went back through the principals, the original principal who was Cy Wallach, For those of you that are Cherry Hill history buffs, and included folks that are currently in the district, Mr. Reardon, Dr. Capania, Dr. Birdie, and also all served as principals at the alternative high school. Dr. Melleby back in the early 90s, who had been at West and was the superintendent of Eastern Regional. But this is the first time that the school district has posted and hired somebody with a special ed background in the alternative high school. So again, kudos to Mrs. Wethington and her team for leading the work. And really excited to see Mrs. Giordano come back to Cherry Hill.
Welcome, Ms. Giordano. Okay, next I am going to turn it over to Ms. Friedel to move P&L.
The superintendent recommends, and I move the following, point 20.1 CUSAC District Performance Review. Do I have a second? Ms. Neary, any comments or questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars?
All right, I have opened up the online voting. You may cast your votes. And we have a unanimous vote.
Okay. We don't have any items to move for strategic planning, so that brings us to our second public comment period. Like the first, we will go to the people that are joining. Yes.
May I read one comment that should have been read in the first portion?
Yes.
First, before we do that.
Yes.
I apologize again for not reading it in the first public session. This is from Jill Roth-Gutman. Thank you for taking the opportunity to read this comment under agenda item 6.1, building renovation versus new construction. Some of our school buildings, such as East, Clairvaux, and Rosa, and Stockton, are in poor condition. Just driving by the three of these buildings, anyone can see there are issues. The front of Stockton does not even look like a school. It's only been in East, I've only been in East twice, and the ceiling was literally falling down with exposed wires. Ask any students at East and Rosa, they will give you a list of issues wrong with those buildings. We need to give serious consideration to rebuilding or renovating some of our buildings from the foundation up. I would also like the district to hire a full-time grants writer to work on fixing the buildings immediately because there are serious safety concerns. Ms. Wethington is being recommended for a promotion to assistant superintendent. I would like the board to vote no to this evening to allow for the position to be publicly advertised for an outside search to occur, for interviews to be held so that most of the highly qualified candidates can be recommended. Ms. Wethington is free to apply, but other candidates should also be considered. Part of CHSEPTA and amongst my friends, I hear about the constant battle for compliance with IEPs, 504s, and buildings that are not ADA compliant. District is not currently meeting the needs of special education students, which leaves the district open for litigation. There are districts right now that are currently closed, with the exception of this vulnerable population. Under Ms. Wethington's role, she should be developing a sense of teamwork and cooperation with parents of special education students. However, it appears CHSEPTA often needs to advocate for services in the community.
Thank you. Okay, so we will go with the people that are joining us in the meeting first. And to submit a public comment, when prompted, please click the raise hand button in the bottom bar of the meeting or dial *9 to raise your hand by phone. If you called on by name or identified via phone, a prompt will show on your screen asking if you want to unmute. If you're joining by phone, you'll need to dial *6 to unmute your phone, and you'll have 3 minutes. You will be muted when your time is up, and please state your name and address before your comment. I'm going to start with, I apologize, there's no last name. I'm going to start with Jill.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
All right, this is Jill Roth-Gutman. I'm the public comment that was just read that was inadvertently left out for the first comment period. That comment should have been read prior to a vote taking place because the Board of Ed needed to know that there was another opposition. Thank you, Ms. Tong, for voting no. Dr. Malosh totally disregarded and discounted everything the community and the Cherry Hill Special Education PTA just stated. He brushed off the community that Ms. Wethington is supposed to be servicing. An impressive CV means nothing without empathy, cooperation, and the ability to build a team. Next, I'd like to address the issue of the Return to Learn plan. I sent an email recently to Dr. Malosh and the board. Dr. Malosh did take the time to answer some of my questions, so thank you. I asked specifically about outdoor learning. What is the district doing to roll out outdoor education so that schools can remain open even if there are positive COVID cases in our community? What creative solutions are being implemented and invested in so we can reopen safely? The answer I received was we have a number of options for outdoor learning for students at each one of our schools, depending upon the temperature and the amount of precipitation. My follow-up is, please be transparent and notify the community about those options. No specifics were contained in your response. What and when will the creative solutions be implemented? Dr. Malosh also further informed me we are not able to hold all classes at all times outside any of our buildings. While I understand his point that not all schools can be accommodated with outdoor education, I would like to know how many elementary schools can be accommodated at one time. I drove by every elementary school in the district over this past weekend, and it appears outdoor education with a minimum hybrid should be able to be accommodated just by taking a quick survey of each of the properties. How many middle school students can be accommodated and how many high school students? What is the plan to roll this out so education can be prioritized? Could any other grounds such as the park by Jake's Place or large soccer fields by Deku be utilized? Is there a plan to work with the mayor and council if school grounds cannot accommodate everyone? Have any local businesses been contacted to assist in the planning process of outdoor education? I am again pleading with the district to reconsider a phased tiered reopening plan. The first plan should include special education students starting with self-contained classes. Right now, Voorhees is only open for IEP and 504 students. The children in these classes are amongst the most vulnerable. The district is asking parents to do the impossible. They have no respite, no behavioral assistance, no OT, no PT, no speech therapists. They're not any of those things. The second phase should include elementary schools and the alternative high school. The next opening would be for the middle schools, and lastly, East and West. Again, what are the creative solutions? Have tents been purchased for the spring? Is the district asking for donations? As I listen to this discussion on neighborhood schools, I would like the Board of Ed to rethink the division of the middle schools and to move away from the lottery system at Rosa as soon as possible. I noticed amongst my daughter's friends, they started talking about it as early as 3rd grade. She's now in 5th. When the renovated buildings and plans were also addressed, I'd like the district to look outside of the immediate area to look more globally at countries that are on the forefront of education, just like Ms. Neri spoke about. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, Mindy Rosen.
Hi, Mindy Rosen, 6 Fairhaven Court. I agreed with everything the person before me said. I'd like to thank Garrison for a really good presentation. If only the district would have listened to all of us who have been asking for a change in architects for years now, perhaps we'd be a little further on. But I think it's really ironic that the neglect all these years and the continued non-compliance would now give us extra money to finally fix these things. It's really ironic. I would like to thank Sally for asking about the difference in cost for the vestibules. Vestibules are a very divisive subject in our community. It would be sad to see a bond fail because of the district's insistence on vestibules. And then I have a question about this resource room thing that was just brought up tonight. Are you going from a special ed teacher in the resource room to a general ed teacher with collaboration? And I heard it mentioned that CHSEPT and CPAG were part of this. Did they actually help in the development of this, or did they just comment on Friday on the slides that you presented to them? Because that is really a very different thing if CPAG and CHSEPTA actually collaborated on this with the resource room, or if you just showed it to them and they commented. That's 2 different things. And then I may be wrong on this, but it sounded to me like when Mrs. Sugars was reading the comments, she read two people's names and said that their comments were basically the same, so that she was only going to read one. I may be wrong, but that's what I thought I heard. And if that is the case, I think that's really not up to her to make that decision. If what I heard was that she only read one of them because they were so much alike. So that is my comment. My comments. Thank you.
Next, Melissa Bush.
Yes, you ignored my comment as well. I submitted it earlier today and it was not read. Virtual schooling has impacted my family in negative ways I would never have imagined. Though my son's autism and his inability to speak has always posed challenges, he has always been happy, kind, gentle, well-liked, intelligent, and fun-loving. A lack of in-person learning has robbed him of these traits. He cries a lot, stims more, and gotten increasingly angrier. He melts down. His meltdowns are not only heartbreaking to watch, but getting harder to control. And he's reverted back to behaviors that we have spent years and tens of thousands of dollars in private therapy to change. He begins to stomp and cry when the school laptop is placed in front of him. It's all too much. Head rubs, hugs, and other once-soothing habits aren't working. Also, this is having a profound negative effect on our 10-year-old daughter, who often has difficulty focusing on her own remote lessons and homework due to the upset in our home as her brother struggles. She is his number one advocate, best friend, and protector. So seeing her brother's decline causes her severe emotional distress. She is also old enough to understand the impact this has had on the entire household. Remote learning is breaking our family. And follow your rules.
Thank you. Jamie Goodwin.
Hi, my name is Jamie Goodwin, 112 Mansfield Boulevard South. I wanted to reintroduce myself. I'm a former graduate from the Cherry Hill Public Schools, and over the past 6 months, I've had the opportunity to become increasingly involved in the Cherry Hill community and school district. I and a friend started a community initiative, which we have titled the Just Education Initiative, and we are now a team of about 8 to 10 people strong, of mainly former Cherry Hill graduates like myself. I, alongside my amazing team of Just Education advocates, have been able to speak with our superintendent, Dr. Milosh, our director of curriculum and instruction, Dr. Mayhem, the former and one of the current co-chairs of the Culture Proficiency, Character Education, and Equity Committee, Mr. Guy, Dr. Chapman, and Mrs. Tiernan, the president, Mrs. Truitt, and several other members of CHACA, the Cherry Hill African American Civic Association, our amazing student advocates at Cherry Hill West and East, Mrs. Giles and Mrs. Joseph, with teachers and even some awesome current students. And before I continue, I should first say, before anything else, that I'm a Black woman. I'm a family member to a current Cherry Hill student, and I too have become very acquainted, angered, heartbroken, and exhausted with the special education program, but also more generally, the exhaustion and hypervigilance required to be a Black family member, a Black student, and generally just a Black community member in the Cherry Hill schools. In the last several board meetings, I've spoke about a need for explicit and clear equity guidelines for remote and hybrid learning that would be established throughout our district. I've advocated around 3 important areas: grading, participation, and discipline, as we continue to learn how to do school during a pandemic. I once again will ask that our superintendent and Board of Education consider bringing an outside educational equity expert to help construct a set of comprehensive equity guidelines for remote and hybrid learning that will specifically address grading, participation, and discipline practices. I appreciate that our superintendent has begun by drafting a letter to address the discrepancies in video practices, but I still believe that this is not enough. It is still unclear if students can be penalized for not using their microphones, how participation will be evaluated for students who choose to use neither their microphones or camera, and how to ensure students will not face social penalties from teachers who may struggle to understand a student's choice not to use his or her video and or camera. his or her video or microphone. I ask that we consider a model similar to the spring of 2020 that will give further clarity around audio and video practices, but also provide flexibility for deadlines, more explicit limits on the amounts of assignments students receive, and remove or limit penalties for attendance and/or participation. I truly believe that in a crisis of learning loss, especially on our most vulnerable students, that is our special education, Black and Brown and economically disadvantaged students, we must act.
Unfortunately, your 3 minutes are up. Thank you for your comment. Next, Carolina Bevid. Sorry if I mispronounced that.
Hi, yes, Carolina Bevid. My address is 1213 Cropwell Road. I had trouble deciding what to say at tonight's meeting because I've said everything there could be to say about my feelings on virtual school. So I looked back at my previous comments and they're still just as true today as they were in September. So I'll be sharing the same thoughts, but this time I'll be reading them myself. I have a unique perspective on virtual learning. I'm a certified teacher, a parent of 2 elementary schoolers, and the leader of a multi-grade pod. As all 3 of those things, I can tell you unequivocally, virtual learning for elementary schoolers is ineffective. This is not an attack on teachers. They are the only bright spot of this district. I believe the burden of responsibility for the inadequacies of the virtual learning format and the fact that students haven't had any or minimal in-person opportunities falls solely on district administrators who did not plan comprehensively enough or include diverse voices in their planning process to address the needs of all learners. This week, I've watched zombie-like, bleary-eyed students stare blankly at the computer. And then I've seen those same exact children light up, participate, and focus when I do something as simple as read them a book. The cold and personal method of virtual instruction causes my own first grade son, who is so naturally curious and eager to learn, to be completely detached and unmotivated. There are so many things wrong with virtual learning as it's been implemented at the elementary level, but let me name a few. Teachers are unable to easily assess student understanding. Students are completing daily tasks without appropriate support. Frequent, undirected breaks create inconsistency and a chaotic home environment. Social emotional development is being stunted. Teachers can't hear the anguish their students are experiencing because all of their students are on mute. Families are struggling to juggle multiple different schedules because schools refuse to modify the encore schedule. Digital literacy expectations are unrealistic, putting an undue burden on parents of young learners and special ed students. And virtual school is agonizingly boring. Virtual learning is a disgrace to elementary education. Some parents may not be complaining, but don't let that fool you into thinking they don't care. Families are drowning. Mothers, especially, are being crushed by the burden of this pandemic. I muster all the energy I have each day to do everything I can to fight for my kids to be back in school, including listening to this meeting for 3 hours and 40 minutes. Therefore, I'm calling for Cherry Hill to, at minimum, return elementary schoolers and special ed students to school for full-time instruction immediately. The negative effects of a dysfunctional school system are far-reaching and dire. The consequences of these district inefficiencies are costly, and not because some parents are paying out of pocket to meet the demands of virtual learning, but because many parents can't afford to do so. Please think about our students with special needs, our students with food insecurity, our students who are unsafe at home, our students who may never recover from this education gap. Keep them at the forefront of your mind and understand that the repercussions of what you do now will be felt long after this pandemic is over. I am also calling for parent representation within the district. Parents have had district decisions thrust upon us, mostly based on inaccurate predictions and conjecture.
Thank you. Your 3 minutes is up, Mrs. Bevan. Thank you. Next is Alana Yaris.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Alana Yaris, 329 Cherry Hill Boulevard. I have listened to this meeting and several meetings over the past several months about remote learning and how our special education parents and children are at a disservice from this district. And I just want to say, as a parent of 5 young children, 2 of which are special needs, I feel that our district and our teachers are doing a fantastic job with educating them and giving them the needs that need to be met. So although maybe there are some in the district who feel that their needs are not being met, I feel that that is not true for everyone, and the negative voices speak louder than the positive ones. So thank you very much for everything that you are doing.
Thank you. Miriam Stern.
Thank you. Miriam Stern, 121 Ashford Road. I just want to talk a little bit about the issue of the cameras on, cameras off, which Ms. Goodwin spoke so eloquently about. And I really appreciate your comments, Ms. Goodwin. You know, as a parent who is home some of the time while my kids are in virtual learning, and as such, I appreciate, you know, the teachers repeatedly asking kindly and encouraging students to put their cameras on. I often wonder what is behind that. I'm also the spouse of a teacher who struggles with sitting in front of a screen at times with kids with cameras off. What efforts is the district making to address some of what's underlying the reasons why the teachers would prefer to have the cameras on? I can appreciate sitting in, I've been in many meetings, including staff meetings in my own office, where some of people have their cameras off. It can be dissatisfying to lead those kinds of meetings. It can be dissatisfying to try to engage students in classes where their cameras are off and they seem disengaged. But our kids, many of them are very disengaged when it comes to virtual learning. That's part of why parents are crying out to ask the district to work towards getting kids back in schools. So what supports can the district put in place to help our teachers, to help bring a sense of satisfaction, to help them continue to be creative in the ways they teach virtually, so that they can get a sense of more engagement and feedback without necessarily having to have kids have their cameras on? We have to think beyond this constant back and forth. It is not a monolith, either cameras should be on or off. We understand we have a diverse group of kids in our district with a diverse group of needs. So let's try to help the teachers and the kids figure out how to do this better. Our teachers need to have a sense of job satisfaction, and many of them probably are really struggling with that right now. There are multiple levels of impact that this pandemic is having on our students and on our teachers. So let's try to bring supports rather than just have this singular dialogue about cameras on or cameras off. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sugars, I'm going to turn it over to you to read any submitted comments.
Jeff Podowitz, 110 Kilburn Drive. At the last school board meeting, I discussed in writing our latest equalized valuation calculations and their effect on our local fair share and state aid formula calculations moving forward. I also discussed and tried to send all school board members state aid formula calculations under QEA for the year 1992-1993. Direct state aid was approximately 12.7 million, which was over 7 million less than the 20.5 million we received in direct state aid 30 years ago. Adjusted for inflation only, that 12.7 million is 22.9 million today. Please note that under QEA, the 12.7 million continued to a low of 10.9 million. Basically, the state of New Jersey cut our direct state aid in half from 20.5 million to 10.9 million. While this cutting took place, our overall student population was increasing. In 2014, Mr. Michael Varnick, the then Director of Government Relations, wrote an article entitled How Then Shapes Now. Stated formulas in the first items he mentioned. I included in this email a PDF of a posting entitled A Short History of School Finance Litigation in New Jersey, 1970 to 2011 by Ms. Deborah Jaffe. She wrote, as the 21st century ushered in huge intractable budget deficits, the legislature froze school aid, and newly squeezed districts made up the difference with service cuts and property tax increases. Our capped aid under SFRA was based on the final year's figure under SEFA. The state aid under SEFA amounted to approximately 15.5 million. Our capped aid under the first year of SEFA was approximately 17.1 million. However, our SEFA calculated formula aid for the first year was calculated to be approximately 29.5 million. We have never received our calculated SFRA aid, but other districts have for years. The difference between capped aid and calculated SFRA formula is significantly greater. I've stated this at other school board meetings. Note our student enrollment in 2010 was 10,979. In 2007, it was 11,469. And our enrollment under QEA for 1992-93 was 9,865. Adjusted only for inflation and considering only number of students enrolled, we have been receiving significantly less per pupil direct state aid to education than we did in 1992-93. That does not include our significant increase in at-risk students. Under SFRA, the funds were supposed to follow the at-risk students in all districts. This never happens in the Cherry Hill School District. The state feels we are being fairly funded. The state felt we were overfunded 30 years ago and took action. In reality, the actions of the state toward us has not changed. The state has not cared about our pleas for fair funding. Leadership at every level has been fighting in Tom's River. After 30 years, that is what we in Cherry Hill need. Next one is from Zoe and Jeffrey Zangrilli, 416 South Cranford Road. On December 7th, the New York City public school system, the largest district in the U.S., opened its approximately 700 elementary schools for in-person learning. With more than 1 million students that attend NYC schools, more than half of those are in pre-K and elementary schools. Special education students, regardless of age, are returning to classrooms 5 days a week on December 10th, minus a couple of interruptions. These most vulnerable students have been given the opportunity to go in person since September. NYC has no return date for its older learners. On December 7th, North Penn School District in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania reopened for hybrid instruction. North Penn's approximately 13,000 elementary, middle, and high school students can attend. They're slightly larger than Cherry Hill schools. Student population of approximately 11,000. North Penn is very comparable in terms of staffing and other demographics. On December 7th, our neighboring district, Haddonfield Public School District, will return to hybrid learning. Some of our nearby districts like Collingswood, Patton Township, Patton Heights, and Voorhees have been able to offer significant in-person instruction since September. Despite these facts, Cherry Hill Public Schools has offered all students, including special education students, fewer than half a dozen days of in-person instruction. The only districts with comparable closures are the Camden City School District and Norristown Area School District, Pennsylvania. However, we don't believe Cherry Hill has the same challenges that those districts face. On December 4th, he told us that the district had been considering a tiered approach to learning since the fall, but our consistent goal since March 16th has been to allow students of all grades to return to our buildings, giving everyone the opportunity to experience the crucial in-classroom experience. Numerous taxpayers, including those with older children, have been requesting a tiered approach. Also, numbers don't lie. During the town hall held in November, we provided the breakdown of our students who were going hybrid and remote. Overall, more elementary students opted to go hybrid than those in the middle and high schools. Also, a whopping 70% of students from the alternative high school, which educates those who need behavioral and emotional support, chose to go hybrid. We implore you to follow the leads of superintendents from the above districts. Now is the time to exercise your leadership skills. Please don't let our children down. Okay, Melissa Bush read her statement earlier. Let's see. Tracy Hoffman, 28 Cobblestone Road. Virtual learning has negatively impacted my family, although both my children need the learning and socialization that being in school provides. I'm going to focus on my fourth grader. Prior to COVID-19, my son loved school and was a great student. Once COVID hit and kids were learning from home, I watched my son's enthusiasm for school fizzle away as work was done in Google Classroom daily. In the spring, before my son would begin his virtual school day, he would climb into my lap and hug me for a solid 5 minutes. He was so sad to start another day. I can't tell you how many times that morning hug brought me to tears. Bouts of anger and tears came regularly when I urged him to complete pointless, repetitive assignments. By the end of the school year, he was only doing the bare minimum. He refused to do anything that he deemed extra. The joy of school was gone. For most parents, we can forgive school in the spring because we were all learning to navigate the pandemic. Summer arrived, my office opened back up. We all watched businesses, restaurants, theme parks, etc. open up, and yet less than a week away, we were told our school would not. The businesses did not have months to prepare, but our district did. Our kids should have had at least 2 months of in-person learning at the start of the school year. Despite a terrible remote learning experience in the spring and an entire summer to create a safe as possible plan, in-school learning was pushed back. My son was devastated. On the top of that disappointment was the blanket decision to cut the school day down, which many marked the district's inability to identify the needs of its younger students from that of its older students, another disruption to students and families in Cherry Hill. The interactive online learning that has been in place since the fall has been an improvement for the spring with 3 days of in-school learning lifted by child. Despite the low number of students attended, my son loved it and was excited to be back. Presently, I am dragging him out of bed to attend virtual school. Our kids and their mental well-being and education seem to be the last consideration in this whole mess. The Cherry Hill School District has been touted for its creativity and rigorous curriculum. We have lavished our teachers with praise. We expect more from our educators and our BOE. Please consider connecting with districts of a similar size to find out their protocols for safe in-person learning. If your plan is to continue this way until we are in a before COVID scenario, our children will be at an extreme disadvantage. People are learning that their own health and livelihood, they have to do their best to move forward alongside this virus as safely as they possibly can. We raise the bar of education, Cherry Hill School District. We moved here because of it. For the sake of our children, please live up to it and allow our children to go back to school in January. Our next comment is from Karen Wolf, 501 Gatewood Road. The Cherry Hill School District should seriously reconsider a tiered approach to in-person learning. To date, Dr. Malash, the administration, and the school board have not provided any clear explanation for why a tiered approach to learning to in-person instruction is not being implemented. Last Friday's postcard did not address the issue in any meaningful way. In a district of 11,000 students, we should not treat high school students the same as elementary students, particularly given what is known about how the virus is transmitted. There is mounting data that in-school transmission is highly unlikely to occur, especially in small classroom settings, making a tiered approach a viable option. This is why this approach is being implemented in school districts around the country. Students and parents in Cherry Hill expect more transparent and clear explanations of why certain approaches, such as tiered approach, are not being implemented in such a large district. This includes a discussion of the specific data and other considerations that are driving the decision. Thank you for your time. Last comment. Rick Short, 1002 Cheltenham Parkway. My public comment starts from my own personal opinion. Does the Cherry Hill School District know, or do you know, Cherry Hill board members know, that what public school has the highest COVID positive cases in America, coming from public data in 28 states? Do you know why this school has the highest amount of COVID cases in the US? Do you think knowing the answer would make 9,000 students, teachers, and staff safer in Cherry Hill? Why doesn't the media know which school in America has the most positive cases? Why don't you hear of the CCD going to the school researching why they have so many cases? Do you think it might make our 19 Cherry Hill schools safer from COVID spread if you knew these answers? Since I might be the one person in Jersey who knows what school has the highest breakout, I hope you listen to my suggestion to make 9,000 students, teachers, and staff safer in Cherry Hill from the COVID spread. Easy ways to make 19 schools safer from COVID spread. Overwhelming data evidence shows more COVID spread is occurring in high schools across 28 states. I would suggest investing in thermal scanners for at least Cherry Hill, East and West to reduce the cost of COVID spread. Please allow CDC school ventilation guidelines and pump extra air 2 hours before school and 2 hours after school closes. I hope one of the 9 board members would mention this to reduce COVID spread in our 19th school before district reopens. As mentioned before, I would hope the district works with Cherry Hill Fire Department and uses their CO2 testers and test classroom CO2 and offices CO2 with windows open and windows closed and doors open and doors closed. You might discover opening all classroom windows isn't necessary and only opening 2 classroom lowers CO2 levels. Moving on to other topics, I've noticed that $2 million was spent on security cameras and they are not completely installed in all schools. I think, why not yet? It's not good closing. Also, committee meetings are not having any public participation. What is the plan to correct this? Also, with no public participation in district board member school steam ahead on bond 2022 without any public comments. What is the plan to correct this?
Thank you.
Here's your one hand up.
We have an additional hand up. Lauren Giordano.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. Oh, I'm Lauren Giordano. I am your candidate for the alternate high school principal, and I just wanted to say thank you. I'm so very excited and so honored to be of service to the families and children in Cherry Hill. And I really look forward to coming on board and working with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Malash, do you have any comments or feedback based on any of the public comment we received?
I do. I have a few items. There are spaces at all of our buildings for outdoor education. They vary certainly depending upon school, classes, and opportunity. It is one of the areas that our technology department focused on during the course of the summer as we are ready for the opening of school. We have additional access points placed outside of the buildings. When they were determining at the building where those outdoor spaces could be and what they would look like. Schools continue to plan. That's an ongoing piece about what spaces can be used inside, outside, and how that would benefit the students. We also had a consistent message that would go out through the buildings, or it was delivered to all the principals, like we went out through the buildings, about dressing appropriately for outdoor education. That there's no inappropriate weather, it's just inappropriate dress, when it comes to it. There was a question about the resource room or the replacement classes at the high school. We refer to as the concept level classes. Yes, right now they are taught by a special education teacher. So move forward, going back to a model we used in the past, which has them taught by a content area certified person with consultation from a special ed teacher. Mrs. Sugars, in terms of determining what comments to be read in our policy, because of what we are doing and comments being submitted electronically, if there are identical comments, the comments can actually be filtered together. Each of the people who submitted those comments was identified and the comment was read once.
And Dr. Malash, along that topic, if I could add that if you're going to submit a comment in writing, it does need to be received to Mrs. Sugars by noon. We did have a couple of comments that came in that were addressed only to the Board of Education, and luckily we were able to forward them to Mrs. Sugars, but I am not monitoring my email box real time, so please make sure that comments are sent to Mrs. Sugars, and her information as well as the directions can be found on the district website.
We absolutely continue to hear about the challenges with remote learning, and we know that they are real and the struggles that parents and children are feeling. Again, please make sure that you are maintaining communication with the teachers, with the counselor. There are additional services that we can offer and that we can suggest and with whom we can put families in contact. Discussion of equity is absolutely a focus and an ongoing piece. We'll be meeting with the principals later this week. We'll certainly include this as part of the discussion. I know that the Social Justice Committee, as Dr. Mahan talked about this morning, talked about during CNI, they were having ongoing meetings. They are currently working with professors from Stockton University and Monmouth University. That's all I have right now.
Okay, great, thank you. So that's all we have tonight. The board is going back into closed session to discuss an HR matter. We will not be taking any action when we come back into public. So at this time, we're going to make a motion to go back into closed session. Can I have a second, please? Mr. Goodwin, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Board members, please dial in to the other link that you have in your email. And thank you everybody for joining us this evening. Talk to you, see you again in a couple weeks. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.